We'd like to call this evening's meeting of the Peoria City Council to order tonight. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Mayor Artis,
Present.
Councilmember Ali, Councilmember Sear,
Here.
Councilmember Grayeb,
Here.
Councilmember Jensen, Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Montalongo,
Here.
Councilmember Moore,
Present.
Councilmember Euler,
Here.
Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Here.
You have a quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. A notice was received by a member of the City Council in accordance with rules established in ordinance number 16142, and the member will be deemed authorized to attend the meeting electronically unless a motion objecting to the member's electronic attendance is made, seconded, and approved by 2/3 of the members of the City Council physically present at the meeting. If no such motion is made and seconded, then the request by the member to attend electronically shall be deemed approved by the City Council and the presiding officer, and shall declare the requesting member present. Councilmember Riggenbach filed his request to attend electronically, and I'm seeing no objections to Councilmember Riggenbach's attendance electronically. So, Madam Clerk, we will deem Councilmember Riggenbach in attendance. Councilmember Riggenbach? Hopefully he's there. Make sure you're not on mute. Pardon me? Can you check on that, Paul? I have one more announcement to read. In accordance with Governor J.B. Pritzker's executive orders 202007 and 202039, stating that provisions of the Open Meetings Act are suspended to include allowing members of a public body to be physically present during a meeting, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's recommendation of social distancing of at least 6 feet between persons. City Hall is open to the public with capacity and social distancing restrictions Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. To fulfill the requirements and recommendations and to comply with the spirit of the Open Meetings Act by conducting the June 23rd, 2020 City Council meeting in person with the members of the council and designated city staff, with department heads attending remotely from room 404, and members of the public and media invited to watch through the live stream YouTube television broadcast channel 22 or the radio broadcast through WCBU radio. Submissions for the public comment were received through the city clerk's office. The agenda, minutes, and video podcast of the meeting will be available online through the city website. Okay. Council member, where's my agenda? Ruckriegel. Oh, we have a proclamation first, excuse me. Pardon me? Pardon me? Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Jeez. Excuse me. At this time, I would like to ask everyone to please join me and stand for a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
I don't know if I had something on my end, but I can hear now, so thank you.
Councilmember Riggenbach?
Thank you. Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
We have one proclamation this evening for Arbor Day. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees. And whereas this holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. And whereas Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world. And whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce life-giving oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. And whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now, therefore, I, Jim Ardis, Mayor of the City of Peoria, do hereby recognize the last Friday in April as Arbor Day in Peoria, Illinois. We had Director Powers or others from Public Works that would have normally addressed us, along with some of the other folks in the community that support Arbor Day who aren't able to be with us yet due to the COVID restrictions, but we thank them for their continued support and reminders to us of the importance of trees and of remembering on Arbor Day. Councilmember Recreagle.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the minutes of the regular City Council meeting held on June 9th, 2020 as printed.
Seconded by Councilmember Graham. Any corrections or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
And that motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Yes, we are at the township portion of our meeting this evening, and you'll notice that we have a number of items that we need to present to the town board this evening, because this represents our annual meeting of the Town Board of Trustees, and this it adopts all of the annual resolutions that we normally do. And this was scheduled for April 14th, but because there was no gatherings allowed, we had to postpone this portion. And this is not to be confused with the annual town meeting, which is of the electors. And at this particular meeting, all town board members are allowed to vote, whether you live in the township or not. But because of your position as a town board trustee, you will all be voting. So the first item of business is the public hearing regarding the 2020-2021 budget for the town of the City of Peoria. And we announced to the public that any comments that the public would have should be sent to my office by noon today, so that we would be able to read those comments into the public record. And for the record, I received no comments. So our township attorney suggested just a receive and file, a motion to receive and file.
Okay. And the Township Attorney Redling Schaefer is with us during this portion of the meeting if we have any questions from the Township Attorney. Trustee Graham?
Move to receive and file.
Motion to receive and file, seconded by Trustee Jensen. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-143 is the annual report draft of April 1, 2019 through March the 31st, 2020, with a request to receive and file.
Trustee Graham.
Mr. Chairman, unless there are any questions or comments, I would move to receive and file this accounting.
Okay. Motion to receive and file, seconded by Trustee Moore. Any questions? Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
20-144 is a resolution consenting to the employment of Mesher Reinhardt and Redling Schaefer as town attorneys with a request to approve.
Trustee Gribb?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve.
Seconded by Trustee Ruckriegel. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye. And, Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's really hard to hear the clerk on this phone line, so I don't know if that's something else that can be adjusted, but I can hear you and the other council members, but the clerk is really hard for me to hear.
The clerk? Okay, thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
20-145 is the resolution for the town of the city of Peoria authorizing township officials to continue a loss control policy with Torma and to enter into a contract of insurance with a request to approve.
Trustee Gribb?
Mr. Chairman, I move to continue that loss control policy and to enter into the contract of insurance as outlined.
Okay, seconded by Trustee Kelly. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
20-146 is a resolution authorizing the town of the city of Peoria to enter into a payroll services agreement with ADP LLC with a request to approve.
Trustee Gribb?
Mr. Chairman, I move to enter into that payroll service agreement with ADP LLC.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Moore. Is there discussion on this item? Councilmember Sear?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question for Mr. Abnauer. We just voted on the attorney. Now we're going to look at ADP. Any ways to save money into consolidating some services with the city and the township?
I'm sure there might be. I would be glad to look into that. I can certainly get back to you with some options or some opinions of mine. If any of the trustees have ideas, I'd be glad to listen to them, but off the top of my head, I really don't want to throw anything out there, but I would certainly, think about that and certainly get back to you in a week or so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have a motion and, okay. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
20-147 is a resolution authorizing the town of the city of Peoria to enter into an agreement with the Heartland Clinic with a request to approve and to receive and file the 2019 statistical report.
Trustee Gribb?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Motion to approve, seconded. Councilmember Kelly. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
20-148 is a resolution authorizing the town of the city of Peoria to make a donation to the Center for Prevention of Abuse with a request to approve and to receive and file the 2019 report.
Trustee Gribb?
Trustees has some observations to make. Trustee Moore?
Trustee Moore?
Thank you, sir. With this resolution, I intend to move for an approval, but what I like to do is to make it more, the donation more clear in this request. And my clarity is the resolution authorizing the town of the city of Peoria to make a donation of $10,000 to the Center for Prevention of Abuse. That is my clarification that I'd like for this particular item. If you may recall, a couple of you may recall that I've brought this issue up the last couple of years. Talked about it last year when the donation went from $10,000 to $20,000. And first, let me say, Center for Prevention of Abuse does a fantastic job. I have absolutely no concern about them receiving any kind of funding at all. My concern is mainly on the transparency in process. When asked, how is it that this one organization has been receiving $10,000 every year for the last 10 years, we don't have anything on file that indicates why we're providing monies to this organization. The reason that's important is because there are many organizations out there that would love to receive funding from not only the township, but the county and the city. And I think it would behoove us to have some kind of process that if we were ever questioned about why they're receiving funds, that there was a process that's known to everyone, that's made public, that there's an application process, that folks know that this money is available, and then people could apply. Now, it's quite likely that Center for Prevention of Abuse would apply and get approved. That's a wonderful thing. I would not have any concerns with that. My concern is on the transparency in the process, and that is why I'm requesting that we add that approval of $10,000. Now, if you looked at the item, it indicates that the request, the donation was going to be $20,000, and after talking with the township supervisor, my first concern was that with all of us looking at our budgets, the city, the county, the state, federal government, because of COVID, I wanted to make sure that the county was in good shape with their funds, and I've been very impressed with Mr. Abnauer and what he's done since he's held this position over the last couple of years, and he was able to assure me that the township funds are in good shape, that those in his office are doing what they need to do, and he's brought through a number of improvements and cost savings to the township, so I thank you for that. The other $10,000 I would like to have appropriated, if this is a correct forum, to an organization that is also providing general services that would fit within the criteria of the township, and I've asked the township supervisor to make a recommendation. I didn't have a recommendation. I just wanted to make sure the transparency in the process was there. There was no organization I had in mind for the other $10,000. He suggested Friendship House would be a good suggestion, and I was in favor of that. I don't know how we would facilitate that here. If that has to be done later, that's fine. I'm indifferent because we're not changing the amount of the budget that we're going to ask to approve. We're not changing that at all. That's the next item, and I intend to vote to approve that as well. We're just changing the amount inside for this one organization. And so I'm not sure, I've not had to speak on a township issue like this, so I don't know if Mr. Trustee Mayor or if it's the attorney that would want to speak to that, if we could, how we would do that.
If I may, thank you. Thank you, Trustee. Simply, the easiest way I think to do this on the agenda tonight is an approval to the Center for Prevention of Abuse. Whatever that amount is, the board can proceed there. I think for transparency purposes, a future agenda should address a subsequent grant in that facility. The budget, you're absolutely right. This is something where if it's already a line item, we would not need to amend the budget, so we would be sufficient there. And even if we had to, there's another way to do that, and that's a line item transfer that we can do by board action later.
Perfect. So do I need to do the clarity of the $10,000, or do we just approve it the way it is?
On the agenda, it's the resolution to make, it doesn't say a specific amount. I think your motion would be to advise the township to expend the amount the board wishes.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll go ahead and with the $10,000, though, it's okay? Okay. So we would be adding to approve the amount of $10,000, and we would not be doing anything with the other $10,000. We would, as the attorney recommends, come back on that later.
Okay. Seconded by Trustee Grab. Additional discussion, Trustee Kelly.
I don't have a disagreement with Councilman Moore, but as I look at the resolution says $20,000 to the Center for Prevention of Abuse.
I think that we'd be in a position to accept a motion to amend the original resolution to 10,000 and then vote on the motion as amended.
Okay.
Would the motion maker agree with that? Then I would so move.
Okay. We have a motion by Trustee Kelly to amend that motion, seconded by Trustee Moore. Is there any discussion on this motion? Please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach?
Aye.
That motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 nay. Trustee Sear. And so we would be back at the motion, the original motion for the $10,000, which is seconded by Councilman Graham. Discussion on this item. Please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 nay. Trustee Sear. Madam Clerk. What color is that tape? Is that yellow?
20-149, the annual town budget and appropriation ordinance for 2020 to 2021 with a request to adopt.
Trustee Graham.
Counselor Redling Schaefer, is it okay to adopt it as it is in view of what we just did?
Not having the budget in front of me, Trustee, as long as we have a line item that addresses an expenditure up to that amount, and if it looks like it probably exceeds it, would be my guess based on the resolution, you can proceed to adopt the budget with no concerns. If there needs to be line item transfers or anything like that in the future to maybe address a subsequent grant by this board, we can do that as long as we're consistent with the municipal budget law, which contemplates intra-fund transfers of not more than 10%.
When we worked on the levy, the township officials, few months before the pandemic, we had a rather vigorous debate about where that levy should be set. And just as you would expect, and this is the beauty of having a group of people who aren't all of one mindset, we had a vigorous debate about whether that levy was too high or was it perhaps too low given some of the exigencies that could happen, like who knew the pandemic was out there? And concern about possible repeal of Obamacare, et cetera, that was very much in the mix in the Congress even then. I think our township officials did a good job setting the levy the way they did. And I think you can be comfortable with this budget and this appropriation ordinance for 2021, and therefore I move to adopt it as outlined.
Thank you. Seconded by Trustee Ali. I'll take this minute to follow up on Councilman Graham's comments. We do have all of our township officials here tonight. We have our township supervisor, Mr. Abnauer. We have the township attorney, Mr. Redling Schaefer. Mr. Schlafly's here from the assessor's office. Our clerk, Beth Ball, is here. And I believe that the treasurer for the township, Patrick Nichtine, is in the adjoining office. We would like to thank all of them for the work on behalf of the township throughout the year. And certainly some challenging times. the end of last year, we never anticipated all the things that have hit your door because of COVID. So thank you all for your diligence, and also last but certainly not least is Trustee Graham, who is our liaison to the township and has numbers of meetings throughout the years representing us, and we appreciate his time and effort on our behalf as well. So we have a motion and a second to approve the budget, and I'm seeing no lights for discussion, so please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach? Trustee Riggenbach? That motion passes with 10 ayes. Madam Clerk.
20-150 is a resolution consenting to the appointment of Clifton Larson Allen LLP as outside independent auditors with a request to approve.
Trustee Greb.
Chairman, I move to approve.
A motion to approve, seconded by Trustee Ruckriegel. Discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach. That motion passes 10 ayes, no nays. Madam Clerk.
20-151 is a resolution designating individuals to prepare the budget and appropriation ordinance for fiscal year 2021 to 2022 with a request to approve.
Trustee Greb.
Looking forward to 21, 22, and hope 20 will be in the rearview mirror soon. Move for approval.
Motion to approve, seconded by Trustee Moore. Discussion on this item. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach. Motion passes with 10 ayes. Madam Clerk.
Item 20-152 is the resolution designating the time, place, and date of the 2021 annual town meeting, with a request to approve.
Trustee Greb.
For approval.
Motion to approve, seconded. Trustee Jensen. Discussion on this item. Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Trustee Riggenbach? No. That motion passes 10 ayes, no nays. Madam Clerk.
That concludes our township portion of the meeting. So we are at the consent agenda. 20-153 is a request to approve the renewal of property and contents and auto catastrophic coverage insurance with Alliant Mesero Insurance Services in the amount of $208,989. 20-154 is a request to approve the First Amendment to Master Professional Services Agreement 18-369 with Foth Infrastructure and Environment, LLC, authorizing an extension not to exceed the amount of $500,000 to continue engineering services throughout the city of Peoria. 20-155 is a communication from the city manager and chief diversity and inclusion officer with a request for the following. A is to approve and authorize the city manager to execute a grant agreement with Natural Resources Defense Council for Edwards Settlement Fund Grant Award funding to enhance stipend of 8 cohorts of Peoria Corps members from summer 2020 through summer 2024 in the amount of $288,000. And B is to adopt an ordinance amending the 20 to 21 biennial budget relating to the Peoria Corp grant fund to recognize the receipt of a grant from the Edwards Settlement Fund in the amount of $72,000 and the corresponding expenditures for 2 cohorts of 10 members. 20-156 is a handout in yellow on your desk, and this title changes just a little bit. So I'll be reading from the yellow that also has a handout resolution that's called Resolution Committing Local Funds. But this is a communication from the city manager, and A is to allocate $150,000 for Fulton Street Plaza from the Downtown Conservation TIF, and $500,000 for New Street from Warehouse District TIF. And B is to approve the resolution of a proposed matching funding for the Rebuild Illinois grant for the Fulton Street Plaza. 20-157 is a communication from the city manager and director of community development with a request to table the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class 4, R4, single-family residential district for a place of worship including multi-purpose recreational space, educational programs, food center, and computer library recording studio space for properties at 2100 to 2212 West Ann, 2121 to 2201 West Proctor Street, and 2302 West Ann Street. 20-158 is a communication with a request to concur with a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff for the following. A is to adopt an ordinance rezoning property from a Class R7 multifamily residential district and Class R3 single-family residential district all to Class R7 multifamily residential for property located at 3415 North Sheridan Road. And B is to adopt an ordinance amending a special use for an assisted living facility, Ordinance 13392, as amended to allow for a building addition and grounds improvements with waiver for the property at 3415 North Sheridan Road. 20-159 is a request to concur with the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission to adopt an ordinance approving a special use in a Class WH warehouse form district for a waiver of a wall sign lettering size and placement for properties located at 1000 Southwest Adams Street. 20-160 are appointments and reappointments by Mayor Ardis to the CDBG Public Service Advisory Commission with a request to concur. Patrick Wilmington, Elizabeth Berkey, Farrell Davies, Patrick Kirchhofer, Brittany Ferraro, Brett Kolditz, and Jada Hare. 20-161 are reappointments to the Liquor Commission of Camille Coates, Mike Miller. 20-162 is the reappointment by Mayor Ardis to the Constitution Garden Advisory Committee of Jessica Bestain. 20-163 are the reappointments by Mayor Ardis to the Construction Commission of Lisa Scott and Dennis Shoemaker. 20-164 are the reappointments to the Downtown Advisory Commission of Alma Brown, Raymond Lees, and Jonathan Jenkins. 20-165 are the reappointments to the Fire and Police Commission of William Spears and Lynn Pearson. 20-166 are the reappointments by Mayor Ardis to the Mayor's Advisory Commission for the Disabled of Sonny Olson and Doris Hayes. 20-167 are the reappointments to the Municipal Band Commission of Denise Cooksey and James Hopkins. 20-168 are the reappointments to the Peoria Civic Center Authority of Robert Manning, Matt Bartolo, Crystal Frosto Aboitis, and 20-169 are the appointment and reappointments to the Peoria Public Library Board of Trustees of Vivian Rutherford, Mandar Patakar, and Lucy Gully. 20-170 are the reappointments to the Peoria Housing Authority of Helen King and Kim Furness. 20-171 is the appointment to the Peoria Urban Forestry Advisory Board of Douglas McCarty. 20-172 are the reappointments to the Planning and Zoning Commission of Robin Grantham, Michael Wiesenhahn, and Edward Berry. 20-173 is the reappointment to the Police Pension Fund Board of Trustees of City Treasurer Patrick Nickteen. 20-174 is the appointment and reappointments to the Public Arts Advisory Commission of Jennifer Gordon, Richard Zuckerman, and Carrie Berg. 20-175 are the reappointments to the Riverfront Program and Policy Advisory Committee of Leon Edwards and Patrick Sullivan. 20-176 are the reappointments to the Sister City Commission of Lori Berkwin, Rex Linder, Kevin Sullivan, and Melanie Coulter. 20-177 are the reappointments to the Solid Waste Disposal Committee of City Treasurer Patrick Nickteen and Councilmember Zach Euler. 20-178 are the reappointments to the Tourism Reserve Fund of Councilmember Denise Moore, Councilmember Dennis Sear, Marwin Spiller, Timothy Spears, and Daniel Corey. 20-179 is the reappointment of the Zoning Board of Appeals of Dorian Lassane. 20-180 are the appointments and reappointments to the Advisory Committee on Police and Community Relations of Nikolai Greaves, Nina Goigas, Lorraine King, Councilmember Rita Ali, Demario Boone, Terry Burnside, Tyson Parks, and Shalandra Birch. And 20-181 is the reappointment to the Historic Preservation Commission of Jeffrey Smith, and that concludes your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councilmember Moore.
I'd like to have us pull item 20-154 and 20-159, please.
154, 159. Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to request to pull 20-168, 20-172, and 20-180, please. Thank you.
68, 72. What was the?
180.
180. Thank you. Uh, 168, 172, and 180. Any other items to remove from consent? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve the remaining items. Councilmember Ruckriegel, seconded by Councilmember Euler. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
I'm back. Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-154 is the First Amendment to the Master Professional Services Agreement with Foth Infrastructure.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Director Powers regarding this contract. When all these contracts come through, those of you who heard me ask about contracts before know that I'm asking about the minority participation in the contracts. Director Powers, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the minority participation is within this contract?
I cannot tell you the exact participation amount. I know that they do solicit for minority participation, and all city work is done and performed by either WBE or MBE.
I'm under the understanding that the city has a certain percentage that we like to try to reach each time we have a contract out there of 18%. Is that correct?
That is correct. And this particular vendor is a part of a master service agreement, which is a collective of 19 separate vendors, and are vetted using IDOT's criteria relative to meeting those same goals for either primary or subs. On that list, there are 4 that are in the women category, and 4 that are total in the minority participation.
So 4 of the 19 master service agreements, 4 of those are minority firms.
And the others are challenged to use subs or services of minority firms. Of which-
That phrase "challenge to" concerns me because we've got roughly 20%, 21% of the 19 is a minority firm, but it sounds like we could pretty much be given a pass to the others to meet our 18% minority participation criteria. Are there any processes in place in your office as these master service agreements are being instituted that the firms that they are using under the master service agreement are asked to either conform to an 18% percentage that the city is requiring, or we have our chief diversity officer sign off on why they can't meet that?
The first part would be yes, we would ask them to, and FOS does. The second part, I don't know if we currently vet them through that office, but we can. As you know, Counselor, we try our best to put them in master service agreement.
Okay.
That vetting process, since we use the IDOT vetting process.
Well, I appreciate you using the IDOT process, but I'm not too thrilled about IDOT either. So, Mr. City Manager, is there a way by which the Chief Diversity Officer can be made aware of those firms that are coming in under the master service agreement so that we can assure that the city's 18% goal is attempted to be met?
We certainly,
You're on.
we certainly can, thank you. We certainly can work with the Chief Diversity Officer to ensure that we have the conversation with all of our engineering firms about their work in terms of hiring subs, if and where they can, but also then have them talk to us about what employees they may be having work on the jobs for us, and provide information about the racial makeup of those employees as well.
Well, I appreciate that because this is something that speaks to me greatly. I read an article, and it was in CNN reported a couple days ago, that when COVID is done, they're predicting about 41% of minority businesses will not survive COVID. That's huge. I was very struck by that. It had me thinking differently about a lot of other things. And so with that being the case, even if we were not in the COVID environment, we should still be trying to effort toward this 18% that we've set. But now with this in COVID and post-COVID, I really would like to see that coming through.
Sure.
Thank you. With that, I'd move for approval.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Graeb. Thank you. Is there any additional discussion on this item? I have a quick question, and I talked to the manager about this for a second this afternoon. The original agreement was for $1 million for 3 years, from 19 through 21. This is $500,000 for 2 years. I know that it's a not to exceed amount. We may or may not. Is there a reason why we need to have $500,000 in there for 2 years?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that more than anything, it's just been the amount of work that we've relied on both when it comes to solid waste, the management of the solid waste contract. But if council wants to pare that back, we would be fine with that as well. I mean, I think the Public Works Department is certainly willing to really tighten up this contract, as with all contracts. We're in that position, and we could certainly look at doing that here.
So I'm not in a position to make a motion, but just in light of the situation that we're in right now, and the fact that we don't, I think that's a really fat number for probably what we'll realistically need for 2 years. I would like to entertain a motion at minimum to cut this in half. If we ever need to get more, we'll come back and get more, but I really think that in the flavor of everything that we have going around the horseshoe right now, that I think it would be appropriate if it's not going to cause you or Public Works any issues. Okay. Councilmember Moore?
I'd like to make that motion, Mr. Chairman, that we reduce the amount to $250,000.
Okay, thank you. And that's seconded by Councilmember Ali. Discussion, Councilmember Jensen.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had put the gotten in the queue to speak up to make that motion, so I support that wholeheartedly. While we're on the topic, I'm going to bring up an issue that I've brought up several times during the budget discussions, and wondering if the city manager has started to inquire and ask people like FOTH and other organizations and entities that we have big contracts with if they're willing to reduce their fees by a certain percentage until we get through this COVID crisis.
So we have started, we've been predominantly working.
You're on.
Sorry.
Well, I get your name on. Are you okay? You're using Chrissy's mic. Okay.
Thank you. We have been starting to work with our vendors, our engineering firms. Some of the challenges that we have is that some of these contracts, just like this one, are going to be coming back up. So, and the difficulty that we have, and I'll just be very blunt, with the amount of capital work that is going to be coming out as part of the capital budget, there's not going to be a big appetite for reducing fees, but we'll be certain to ask every single one as we go through that process and talk to them about it.
Okay. As a follow-up, I would appreciate if you do that. I understand maybe we won't get much legwork with some of the capital people that do the capital work, but, you know, as far as any other vendors or businesses that we contract with, I think it's important that we ask them to take that voluntary reduction, at least to help the city of Peoria get through this. So thank you. If you could give us a report when you do that, and maybe if we could keep track of those vendors and businesses that that comply with our request, or, you know, volunteer to do those types of reductions, I'd like to somehow give them some incentive and some recognition for doing that.
Excuse me, Counselor, Mayor, Mr. Manager. I should interject that this particular vendor, FOTH, has agreed to keep their fees flat throughout the completion of this contract.
Dr. Powers, we're having a hard time picking you up. If you could.
Was approached, agreed to keep their fees flat for services throughout the duration of this contract.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. And maybe just to clean this up, because we originally had a motion from Councilmember Moore that was seconded by Councilmember Grab. Maybe we'll just make the amended motion read that it's going to be reduced to $250. And if that's okay with the seconder, Councilmember Grab.
Question. Suppose we get some DCEO funds in here. We had the flexibility of ramping that up then?
Councilman, we would come back to you with an approval to try and up those dollars if we needed it.
Then that'd be okay.
So it was, I think I mentioned before that Dr. Ali seconded the portion on the 250, so we're just going to make it clean. It was the original motion amended by Councilmember Moore. So the motion will be Councilman Moore seconded by Councilmember Grab. I apologize. I'm seeing no further lights. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-159 is a request to concur with the recommendation to adopt the ordinance for the special use for the waiver of a wall sign lettering size on 1000 Southwest Adams Street.
Councilmember Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Director Black. I'll give him a moment to walk to the microphone. I understand they are passing around one mic over there.
Councilwoman, I am here.
Thank you. To this item, it indicates that the warehouse is in a form district. Can you explain what a form district is and how a form district comes to be?
Can you hear me? Yep. Mm-hmm. So with a form district, unlike typical zoning regulations where we're concerned about the use and less about what buildings look like within that particular area, Form districts, as you would expect, are concerned about the form of the development, and in exchange, they allow for a mix of uses that you would not typically have in a regular neighborhood or commercial area. So in a form district, you're going to see a more precise prescription in terms of things like signs, building materials, building height, window size, window placement, etc. The form district and the warehouse district, as well as the other form districts here in town, were all created after a pretty extensive charrette process that took several weeks and then several months of actually writing the code based upon the impact that, or the input that we received from the people that attended the charrette.
Thank you for that explanation. So the reason I asked the director to explain what the form district was and how it is formed is to make folks aware that this is not a district with rules and regulations that one person or 10 people or 11 people around a horseshoe decided upon. This was a compilation of information that was provided by the community and set forth so that certain areas could have a certain look and feel to them. And so when this special use comes to us, we have to determine if this special use fits within, the reason it comes to us is because they are asking for something that does not fit within the requirements of that area. And after talking with the director and looking at if you look at the communication, it pretty much clearly shows you what they are requesting. The one page shows the name of the organization, the name of the business, a lot larger than the other picture. The picture with the smaller lettering is what is required for the form district. The larger lettering is outside of that. I believe the smaller lettering, I believe Director Black, correct me if I'm wrong, is by code supposed to be 18 inches tall.
That's correct.
And the larger lettering, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 36 inches or 32 inches tall?
Councilwoman, you are correct, yes.
On 36 or 32?
It's 32 for the smaller letters and
The B and the
36 for the
D.
larger.
Okay.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And so, in effect, we're twice as big as what the form code requires. In reading through the information, other than the fact that they would like for it to be larger, I'm remembering other businesses that are in the warehouse district currently who are adhered to the 18 inches. One that immediately comes to mind, well, I won't mention them because I don't want this organization to think that organization is complaining, because there's not an organization that's complaining. But there are other businesses within the warehouse district that have already conformed to what we required in the form district. And short of having some compelling reason why this needs to be larger, I'd like to move that we do not approve. There's two parts to this. The first part is that we approve the waiver for the sign height. The second part is that we approve the placement of the sign. I don't know if we need to do that in two motions. Ms. Secretary, County Clerk, Chrissy, do we need to do that in two motions, the sign height and then the sign placement? As the communication reads, it says a waiver for sign lettering size and placement. Is that required of two motions or one?
I would recommend handling it in two separate motions.
And so to the first portion, I don't have any concerns with the placement as shown on the picture with it at the correct size. So to the first item, the size of the lettering, I'd like to move that we do not approve that portion of the waiver request.
Okay, we have a motion to deny. Is there a second?
Yes.
This is the lettering size.
Right. We would go with the form code as written, as the other organizations have done.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Ali. Discussion. Councilmember Kelly.
I've taken a drive and I look at the picture and whatnot, and it's form district, which means there are a lot of variables. And we're trying to be very flexible with form zoning, with the idea that you probably can't write down every single thing you ever want. This looks to me all right. I think it looks all right in the neighborhood. I think it's fine, and so I will be opposed to the motion.
Okay. Councilmember Ali?
Thank you, Mayor. My concern is that it's an exception to the standard regulation that we have, and it will set a precedent for additional businesses coming into the warehouse district wanting a waiver, and I just think that it's appropriate to stay in line with the restrictions that we've set so that we don't set that precedent. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's important to go back and also realize that this went in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they voted on a 5-4 in support of this. And I think that that's important because they are dealing with a lot of these requests, and there can be a lot of exceptions that come up, but I think that the exceptions that we've had for the form district have been few and rare. And if there are some that come up in the future, I sure hope that we wouldn't think that it's taxing us to be able to take those into consideration at least and give them the time that they deserve as a business that's opening here. I think that their request is reasonable. It falls within the, I think, intent of what the form-based code really was to sort of give an overall look, but you don't want everything cookie cutter either. And I do think that there's the request is made here with some backup evidence as to what they're asking for. So for myself, I think that this one will be something that I will be supporting.
Councilmember Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to echo the comments of council members Kelly and Ruckriegel. We live in an environment here where we really need to be flexible to our business community and try to work with them to come up with solutions that are acceptable in the community so that we create an environment where they can thrive. And it really concerns me on something such as this, that we would be inflexible with our business community and send a message that this is not a place for you to do business. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Montalongo, I had your light. Is that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just taking a look at both of the presentations, I think I'm going to have to go with the business owner on what they feel like is going to be best for their business to thrive, especially the investment that they're making into, I guess, their dream business here. So I don't see a problem with this. So I'll be supporting that we go with the request from the petitioner. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Black, just in terms of the discussion about setting precedent, this probably wouldn't be the first time that the council has made a decision to go a little outside of the boundaries on something in a form district, or would it?
Mayor, no. The quick answer is no. The waivers have been issued by the City Council in form districts before, in the warehouse form district and in other form districts.
Thank you. Councilman Graham.
Specifically addressing this issue, Director Black, you'll recall when Bradley University wanted to do all new signs, including a wayfinding sign at Maine University. What did we tell Bradley University that they had to do, Director Black?
Lee was told that they had to reduce the size of all of their signs, and in particular the large wayfinding sign at Maine University.
And scores of signs, when you take into consideration the street signs as well. This is a non-starter. I mean, I just don't see a rational reason to permit them to do what is already outlined and which other applicants have had to do. Now, if we want to start playing favorites, then we're entering into a very slippery domain. I support Councilor Moore's assessment of the situation here. We should be very wary about making exceptions. There are times when there might be a rational reason for it. This isn't one of those times. Thank you.
Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would have you refer you to the planning and zoning minutes where it reads that the Development Review Board recommended approval of the sign placement and denial of the sign lettering size with the condition that a general right-of-way usage permit be obtained for any work within the right-of-way. So there was sounds like a healthy discussion of the denial of the sign's size. In addition, what is the point of a form, excuse me, in addition, to say that something is reasonable that started out in the code as 18 inches and now is 36 inches seems to be a little bit beyond reasonable. If 18 inches was 20 inches or even, 22 inches, then you could say, okay, there's some reasonability there. But from 18 to 36, and that's reasonable, then throw out the form book, because that's I don't consider that to be reasonable when it's twice as big as what the form code, based upon community input, indicated they needed it to be. We've put, as has been noted around this horseshoe many times, we've spent a lot of money in this warehouse district, from the streets, lights, you name it. We've been pouring a lot of money into this district. We've got momentum happening because people have seen what has already occurred and they like it. And so we've got so many residential units coming online based upon what they have seen already occur here. And then to go from 18 to 36 is reasonable, then you're opening the door for the look and the feel that you thought you were getting, that people who already moved into this district bought into, and developers are buying into. Now you're saying, well, that's okay for now, but, maybe we'll change our mind next time. I think we need to adhere to, in this particular case, the 18 inches. As I indicated, I'm a business owner. I help businesses get started. I would be perfectly accepting of a 20-inch or 22-inch to be accommodating. But 36 inches, and then the example that my colleague provided, that Bradley had to make extraordinary exceptions, I think we should go ahead and deny the sign height. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Kelly?
Just for clarity, if I'm reading the minutes of the commission properly, the first motion that was made was only for placement and not for size. That motion was withdrawn. The motion for placement and size, as presented, was approved 5-1.
I believe Councilmember Moore was referring to the Development Review Board, which earlier in the communication, about halfway through, the Development Review Board denied or recommended denial. That's what the difference was.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Regenbach.
Thank you. Form districts are extremely tricky situations. Director Black and I have had many discussions about the Prospect Form District, and that's the one in my district that we've had sign issues on the past on. And I think some of my colleagues have hit the comments that I would make if I was there, that we need to be flexible and we need to also take into account the size of the building and the overall dynamics of what it's going to create. So an exception is clearly an exception, and that's based on a case-by-case basis. I will be supporting the business owner on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing no further lights. We have a motion to deny the waiver on the sign lettering size by Councilmember Moore and seconded by Councilmember Ali. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach.
Nay.
The motion passes with 6 ayes and 5 noes. Voting yes, Mayor Ardis, Councilmembers Ali, Sear, Graham, Jensen, and Moore. Voting no, Councilmembers Kelly, Montalongo, Euler, Regenbach, and Ruckriegel. So we would be on the second portion of this. Councilmember Moore.
I move to approve the second portion.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilman Graham. Is there discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 no. Councilmember Ruckriegel. Madam Clerk.
20-168 are the reappointments to the Peoria Civic Center Authority.
This is Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mayor Ardis. I had a question on Christelle Frosto Aboites, listed as, I know, seems like last month or 2 weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, we had voted her in temporarily on a short term, and now this is the longer term, but it shows non-voting, and she's the only one out of all these appointments showing non-voting. So I just wanted to get an understanding in what instance is an individual appointed as non-voting, and can she be a voting member?
So the way the Civic Center Commission works is we have a couple of non-voting members that are appointed as non-voting.
Okay.
And we did that, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, maybe, and it allows us to have a couple more members that they participate in all the discussions, can ask questions, go into executive session. They just can't vote. But when they get on the board, they're totally up to speed. And so it's been kind of a training ground. So they go on knowing that they're a non-voting member that can participate in everything except the vote. And then when there's an opening, we go from a non-voting position to a voting position, and then the new person would come in as non-voting.
Thank you for that explanation. I move to approve.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Is there any additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach. Councilmember Regenbach. The motion passes with 10 ayes and no nays. Madam Clerk.
20-172 are the reappointments to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mayor. Robin Graham is a family relative, so I will have to abstain.
Okay. We have a motion to approve. Councilmember Jensen, seconded by Councilmember Sear. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach. The motion passes with 9 ayes, 1 abstention. Councilmember Ali. Madam Clerk.
20-180 are the appointments and reappointments to the Advisory Committee on Police and Community Relations.
Dr. Ali.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering whether we need to abstain when our own name is listed.
Council.
If they're being appointed as a member or on behalf of the council, no, they would not need to abstain, but if it's in their individual capacity, then yes, they should abstain.
I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but I think this is a member of the city council, as a member of the council, so you're good to go.
Okay.
Okay.
I move to approve.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Seer. Discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. The motion passes 10 ayes, no nays. Madam Clerk.
We're at first readings. 20-135 is a request to receive and file a first reading review of an ordinance amending Chapter 18 of the Code of the City of Peoria relating to the creation of a voluntary business registration. And I call your attention to a yellow handout that is the ordinance, the proposed ordinance on your desk.
Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know in the past we've let the first readings go through. However, I think at this point, just kind of where the state of our budget is at, I'd like to table this and bring this back once we have a chance to have a discussion on how we could build a internet-based type registry that and look for some grant money to be able to fund this. So at this point, I'd like to table this. I'd like to make a motion to table this for a later time.
Okay, motion to table, seconded by Councilmember Euler. I believe a motion to table is not debatable, so we will call the question. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Another first reading, 20-182, is a request to receive and file a first reading review of a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to adopt an ordinance amending Appendix A relating to short-term rentals.
Thank you. Maybe we'll ask Director Black to give us a summary of this, and maybe in advance of questions, since I know he's received a few on different sides of this. Maybe you could just address some of the questions that we've been getting as well.
Thank you, Mayor. So this item has been before the City Council before, and there's been quite a bit of conversation both at the Planning and Zoning Commission and then at a public meeting in December of last year and with various other groups in the meantime. Effectively, a short-term rental is a rental property where the term of the lease is less than 30 days. The most common of the short-term rental platforms in the country right now is Airbnb, but there are probably a dozen or more different short-term rental platforms that people can make their properties available on. Currently, short-term rentals are not permitted in the city of Peoria. There's nothing in the zoning ordinance that would allow a residential property to be rented for less than 30 days. So the purpose of this ordinance is to create a pathway for property owners to allow their properties to be rented for less than 30 days and still stay in compliance with all of our regulations. What we're recommending at this point, or what's before you in this first reading, is that short-term rentals would be a permitted use in most of our zoning districts, all of the residential zoning districts, the institutional zones, the commercial zones, industrial, and I-1 industrial. However, we do recognize that a short-term rental is more like a hotel than a typical rental property where the lease is more than 30 days. And as such, we're going to recommend that they be treated as hotels. Therefore, in order to have a short-term rental in Peoria, although it's a permitted use in the zoning code, the owner of the property would have to obtain a hotel license and would have to pay hotel taxes just as any of the more traditional hotels in town would do. Beyond that, there are some other requirements that would go along with this recommendation, including a self-certification by the property owner that the property meets minimum code, and information that they would have to make available to their tenants. Basically, they would outline what we would expect of tenants in a short-term rental situation. So some of the questions that we've received are really kind of on two sides of this. One is that the regulations, at least the initial regulations, were too stringent for the use. Initially, we'd recommended that every single short-term rental in town be a special use, and so every property would have to come before the city council for approval. There was a lot of pushback on that from property owners who said that that's really difficult for a business that really doesn't have a particularly large profit margin. On the other side, in terms of other questions that I've received, are from neighborhoods that have restrictive covenants that do not permit short-term rentals. So nothing that the city council adopts would supersede a restrictive covenant in a neighborhood that does not allow short-term rentals. So in other words, if the city council adopted language that said property in ABC subdivision can be a short-term rental, if that same subdivision has a restrictive covenant that says properties cannot be rented for less than 30 days or less than 60 days, whatever they have, then that would rule. However, the association of the subdivision, the homeowners association or the subdivision association, would have to take action to enforce their own regulations because the city is not party to that restrictive covenant. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council has on this first reading.
Thank you for that summary. We have Councilmember Grab first.
Dr. Black, they would be paying hotel taxes. What about our fire codes? Do they have to meet certain requirements as it relates to those?
Yes, sir. They would have to, the self-certification form, which is very similar to the form that we use for our non-owner occupied properties, includes a section on egress from the property and smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and other life safety items.
Sprinklers?
Sprinklers would not be required because they're not required in single-family residential properties.
Director.
Councilmember Kelly next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Black, first of all, within, not necessarily the purview of this ordinance, but within your plan, are you planning on informing these various, especially the larger facilitating companies, of our tax rates, et cetera, so that as they charge, they know where to send the tax money?
Councilman, on that particular question, the ordinance that the city council adopts has to indicate that the taxes will be levied or charged to the properties. How those taxes are collected is more of a process question and less of an ordinance question. Ultimately, the ordinance has to say that the property owner is responsible for paying the taxes. Some communities have been able to work out arrangements with some of the short-term rental platforms where, for example, Airbnb may collect the hotel taxes on behalf of the property owner and then remit those taxes to the local community. The initial conversation that we had with Airbnb probably a year ago, at that time they indicated that they were not interested in entering into that agreement with Peoria or in Peoria. My understanding is that the finance department has reached out to them again in order to see if they have changed their mind on that. But as I said in my introductory remarks, there are at least a dozen different short-term rental platforms out there, and some of them collect, some of them don't collect. And regardless, what the city council would have to do is pass an ordinance that indicates the tax has to be paid.
I've used those outfits a time or two myself. Do you have any idea, and the taxes are always included, do you have any idea why they are not interested in cooperating along those lines?
Councilman, I don't know. My sense from the discussion, or at least what I understand the discussion was a year ago, is that the market simply wasn't large enough in Peoria for Airbnb, and that's just that one company.
Mr. Manager, did you have
I was going to say it's some of it's a matter of the burgeoning market. There's a smaller number of places. Another part is it's very similar to what Amazon did when it came to the collection of sales taxes. Some of these companies just don't want to do it. They put the onus back on the property owners that have the properties to say, you'll be responsible for remitting any taxes to your local jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you. Also, I'm not sure I'm reading this properly, but it seems to me that if I have a rental property right now, long-term rental property, I could take advantage of the ordinance, declare myself a short-term rental outfit, reduce my fees, and I don't have to go to school anymore. Am I correct about that? I can't quite find out where that wouldn't happen.
So, Councilman, on that, what we're trying to do is make it basically a seamless process, so that if a property owner, because one of the items that we did hear from the public is that a lot of property owners who have short-term rentals may in fact switch to a longer-term rental during the year, or vice versa. And so what we basically said is that if someone came in and paid their $75 annual registration for a rental for a non-owner occupied property, and then they decided later in the year to do short-term rental, then that $75, they would have to tell us that they were switching to a short-term rental, but that $75 would be credited against their hotel fee, which is also $75. So basically, it would cost them nothing. And a property owner going the other direction from a short-term rental to a longer-term rental would have the same benefit. And the only non-owner occupied property owners that have to go to the landlord training anymore are those landlords that have had violations.
Okay, thank you. And the matter of the restrictive covenants concerns me a little bit. Most neighborhood organizations don't have a whole lot of money. And it seems to me that if our ordinance says that if your homeowners association says no, then you can't do it, then if I set up a short-term rental in that neighborhood, am I not violating a city ordinance? And thereby, the city could do the litigating. I mean, a lot of these HOIs are, they have $1,000 in the bank. They can't litigate this stuff.
Councilman, I think there's maybe two questions there. One is a policy question for the city council that would basically be, does the city council want to put the city of Peoria in a position where we are taking into consideration private agreements in the development of city ordinances? And then the second question, I would have to defer to Corporation Counsel in terms of whether the city could litigate on behalf of private associations.
My first question. my first question is that the ordinance says that if a homeowners association forbids short-term rentals, the city will recognize that. So if somebody violates that, why is that not, or is that not a violation of a city ordinance?
Andrew?
So if we get a letter from a homeowners association that says that they object to this short-term rental, and they can say that they have their covenants in place, then we won't grant that going forward. But the issue of enforcing covenants on behalf of a homeowners association, I would strongly recommend against that, and I would add probably what we're saying is that we're not going to enforce, other than if the homeowners association says this is against our covenants, we're going to ask that property owner to submit a letter saying that they have got the concurrence of their homeowners association that they can have a short-term rental there. We don't want to get into the enforcement business of neighborhood covenants. It's just not something that really municipal government should be doing.
Why is it that the ordinance says the city will agree with the HOI?
Director, do you want to explain that?
Why don't we just leave it blank then? I mean, it seems to me that there's a halfway mark here that we're in the middle of. Why don't we just leave it blank?
Councilman, perhaps, since this is a first reading, perhaps before this comes back, I can have an opportunity to speak with Corporation Counsel. I mean, I understand what you're asking is, as one of the check boxes for the approval, sort of the performance standards. In order to have a short-term rental, you have to register the property. In order to have a short-term rental, you need to pay your use taxes. And what you're suggesting is that we add, in order to have a short-term rental, you have to be in a area that does not restrict the use of properties as short-term rentals through private agreements. So I understand what you're saying, and if you would allow me to have a conversation with Corporation Counsel before this comes back, we'll see if we can work that in.
Thank you.
We have Councilmember Jensen next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Black, thank you and your staff. I know you've been working on this for quite a while. And I just wanted, if you would, just for the public, can you just give us a brief overview of what, I know this originally was coming forward, and there were a lot of citizens that were concerned about the proposed ordinance, so then we pulled it back, and then I know your team had community meetings and sought public input. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, Councilwoman.
Can you just kind of go over that process?
Sure. So I believe the first time short-term rentals came before the City Council was probably 2 years ago as part of a discussion about rental properties in general. And then after that, it was taken to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then it came to the City Council. The City Council asked that more work be put into it, and a public meeting be held. There was a public meeting held in December of 2019, and then there was additional conversations with various groups and individuals after that public meeting. There was a public hearing held in March of this year before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and initially this item was going to then immediately come to the City Council after that Planning and Zoning Commission during the first week in March, and then other things happened, and the item was delayed until it is before you this evening as a first reading. So there have been, a good, I'll say conservatively, a good half dozen opportunities for public input on this particular item, and we have certainly received lots of comments.
And so based on some of that input, I noticed if you look at the draft we have, it looks like there's quite a bit of proposed text that then was stricken. Is that right? Or is that stricken from our current ordinance? Like if you look at, these don't have page numbers, let's see.
Councilwoman, yeah, that's all stricken from the current ordinance in order to sort of streamline a lot of these regulations. So, for example, we're pulling out the existing regulations on bed and breakfast because a bed and breakfast, for all intent and purpose, is really just a short-term rental. A lot of the initial recommendations that were brought to the City Council have simply been removed from this recommendation. And probably the largest one, as I said during the intro, is that the initial staff recommendation is that every single short-term rental in town would be a special use and would have to go through the special use process. So every individual property would have to go to a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission and then come to the City Council for an up or down vote. And that really was a pretty heavy regulation for this particular type of use. And it was probably the number one item that a lot of the public commenters objected to. And so that's the item that has been removed and replaced with just a permitted use.
So I commend you for taking the time and the staff to listening to some of the concerns and modifying this proposed ordinance. I just want to make sure that I'm reading this correct and it's sort of along the same lines as Councilman Grab. These properties still will have to comply with the city's housing and building and fire and life safety codes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then I know you looked at what other cities do. Is this similar to how a lot of cities treat short-term rentals?
I think on the spectrum of short-term rental regulations, this is quite a light touch compared with a lot of communities. A lot of communities do require some type of registration fee and extensive registration fee. A lot of communities require an actual physical inspection of the properties before they're approved as a short-term rental. This is probably about as light of a touch in terms of regulation as I have seen.
And then what's the rationale for moving in that direction or recommending it in this manner?
Well, so I just to maybe take a couple of these items. One of the items, again, that was in the initial recommendation was that every property had to be inspected by city staff prior to a short-term rental license being issued. One of the commenters at the public meeting brought up, I think, a very valid point that just because of the nature of short-term rentals and the platforms that they're on, Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and all of the other short-term rental platforms, it's a very public review of the condition of the properties. And so unlike a typical rental property where someone is renting on a month-to-month basis or an annual basis, short-term rentals are out there on the internet. Everyone can see the photographs of the units, and perhaps most importantly, they can read the reviews of the people who stayed there. So some of the concerns that we had in terms of the condition of these properties was alleviated simply because of how public and how noticeable and how quickly reviews can build up both good and bad on these particular units. So just by going through kind of that process, we were able to strip off some of the regulations because our goal is always to have the lightest possible touch of regulation as we can and still make sure that we're protecting life and safety issues.
I have one more question, and I'm not sure if this is, you probably can answer it, but I'm not sure if Corporation Counsel wants to. I just am wondering about our other ordinance that prohibits more than 3 unrelated individuals to live or to reside together, just to make sure that doesn't conflict or there's an exception, because I'm assuming these short-term rentals often have more than 3 may have more than 3 unrelated people if they meet the size requirements of the building codes. So
Councilwoman, I can answer that. So that is a restriction. That's the definition of family that we have for residential uses. The way we're classifying a short-term rental in the zoning ordinance is it's a commercial use, and therefore that restriction on the number of unrelated adults would not apply.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, and thanks for your work on this. I appreciate it.
We have Councilmember Ruckriegel next.
Thank you, Mayor. And Director Black, thank you for your work on this again. I don't think we can say it enough. A lot goes into a document like this, and especially with an industry that's emerging, because there's a lot of unknowns. And there's also a lot of media about what's happened in other cities. And it's interesting, I think many of us around the council here have gotten probably a lot of communication on both sides of the issue and bringing up some very good questions and some very thoughtful questions as well. For those that are in the public right now listening and maybe a little bit worried about sort of the exception to the rule where maybe there might be a bad renter or a bad experience there, can you walk through the process of how that looks like through our code enforcement, through our process to be able to, I guess, restrict use as a short-term rental if there are certain violations on there? And, are there tickets issued for bad behavior? Does that go to the tenant? Does that go to the landlord? If you can kind of walk us through that process.
Thank you, Councilman. So being a short-term rental does not remove either the tenants in that property or the property owner from any of the other code requirements of the city of Peoria. If someone rents a short-term rental and throws a giant party and sets off fireworks and a neighbor calls and complains, then a police officer would probably respond and take the appropriate action based upon the violation that was there. If we receive complaints about the condition of a property, then we would follow up as we would with code enforcement or building safety as we would with any other property in town. So there's no free pass that anyone gets by being a short-term rental. One of the items that is not in this first reading that we have discussed and we'll look at a little bit more before this comes back to you is a mechanism to revoke the short-term rental hotel license because of issues at the particular property. Right now, the way the ordinance reads, just the existing ordinance reads that the license can be revoked for failure to pay the use tax, but it does not include any other reasons to revoke the license. So we can certainly look at adding in some language that basically says if there are 2 or more, 3 or more violations within a certain time period, then the license can be revoked.
Great. Thank you for recognizing that. I saw that in there that there is a mechanism in case that the taxes and fees aren't collected, but that part was not sort of written out or very clear. So I appreciate your attention to that. Thank you very much.
I'm not seeing any more lights here on the first reading. Councilman Montalongo.
Sorry about that, Mayor. I thought I hit my button there when you said you didn't say any more lights. I wanted to make sure I get my words in here too. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. Director Black, thank you for the work that you've done on this so far. Appreciate that. Just got a couple questions. I think there was a lot of good questions that have been brought up here by my colleagues. I am a fan of the Airbnb, and I've stayed in a lot of amazing places over the past few years. I've always wondered, as I'm driving in at times when there's people in neighborhoods just wondering, like, here's another vehicle coming into the Airbnb home. And so just how much, as far as being able to get weigh-in from the residents who live in the proposed area, I heard you mention that there would be a public hearing, and I guess my next question would be is concerning a special use. Would special use be probably the best or the fairest way to go about approaching this problem?
At this point, we are not recommending the special use process, which would require notification of the surrounding property owners. Effectively, what we are recommending at this point is that if someone wants to have a short-term rental, then as long as they obtain a hotel license and agree to follow all of the other requirements, which are based upon life safety, and that they continue to remit their hotel tax, then they can go ahead as a permitted use without any notification of the neighbors and have their short-term rental.
I think it's something that we should consider. I'm sure there's, all neighborhoods are different, and I'm just even thinking for some of the neighborhoods who might have a large home, and who knows, maybe 5 families could come and stay in at one large home, and what does that do to the neighborhood? And if that's a constant seller, for example, but and certainly, somebody making an investment in taking a home that needs to be polished up and turn it into an Airbnb, I'm sure that's very welcoming into a lot of neighborhoods. But I think we got to find some kind of balance here, which makes it fair. And listening to some of the comments by Councilman Kelly here about some of the neighborhoods with homeowners associations, and potentially creating a legal expense for them, and to try and enforce this every time that it does come up. Perhaps the method by special use would be the fairest throughout the entire city. So coming back, what I guess the question to ask you is, what would a special use look like? And if you don't quite have that answer tonight, maybe in our communication as an option for us to take a look at for when this comes back for us, what that special use would look like, if you don't mind commenting on that.
Sure, Councilman. What I can certainly do, not to just so as not to extend the meeting this evening, is we can provide that information to you between meetings, and we could even bring back an A and a B option for the City Council to consider. One that would be a permitted use, and another one that would be a special use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Riggenbach?
Director Black, wasn't the special use one of the early options that was considered, actually, that got quite a bit of negative publicity?
Yes, Councilman, that was one of the early options, and as I indicated, was taken out in this this version that we are recommending to you. But ultimately, it's a policy question for the City Council, and I'm happy to bring back 2 ordinances for the Council to consider.
And when you bring that back, make sure you include the cost to the single B&B operator as to what the cost of that would be to go through the special use process, because for somebody looking to rent a room or 2, that could be quite onerous, couldn't it?
It certainly could be, and we will include the cost and the process involved in this in a special use.
Thank you.
Councilman Gribb.
If we had a special use protocol, we chose to implement that, second reading, would that contravene any neighborhood association, homeowners association covenant that would forbid an STR?
Well, sir, no, sir. The restrictive covenant would still rule in a situation where a special use was approved.
And right now, we guesstimate that we have about 200 of these operating. That's an estimate only. Already operating with no regulation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Black, when we received a lot of this negative feedback, as Councilman Riggenbach pointed out, wasn't that from the operators?
Councilman, I think that it's safe to say that that the operators and the owners of properties that are considering short-term rentals were in favor of fewer regulations, and a lot of the neighborhood associations, the homeowners associations were in favor of more regulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. The negative feedback came from the operators, proposed operators, and I really think from the residential side, people will probably want to weigh in on it. That's why I'm leaning towards a special use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the first reading? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive and file by Councilman Sear, seconded by Councilman Ruckriegel. Please cast your ballots. Councilman Riggenbach.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-183 is a first reading review of an ordinance amending Chapter 18, Article 14, and Chapter 3, Article 20, pertaining to the sale of tobacco.
Council Peterson.
Mr. Mayor. At council's request, we did some research into recent tobacco violations and determined that going back to 2016, there had only been 5 citations listed or 5 citations issued for businesses that were selling single cigarettes. That is a code that we have already had on the books, and it's been there for quite some time. What we found interesting about those 5 citations is they were concentrated in 3 businesses. We went on to look at businesses that had been issued citations for selling tobacco to minors, and although the citation numbers were quite larger than what we saw for selling cigarettes, we did see a similar trend where those violations were concentrated in a small portion of the overall number of licensees. Annually, the city has somewhere between 70 and 90 tobacco licenses, and in 2016, the highest citation number issued was for 36 for selling tobacco to minors. So it does not appear at all to be a problem that we are seeing with the majority of our tobacco retailers. So looking at the process we had for liquor operations and liquor licensing, a question had come up about whether or not we could propose plans of operations for licensees that may be having repeated violations, repeated issues at their establishments. So what you have in front of you is an amendment to the tobacco code that would allow for a plan of operation when licenses are being issued. It also clarifies what the revocation or suspension procedure would be for those that are cited for violations under the tobacco code as well.
Thank you for that summary. Councilman Gribb, I know you brought this forward first. Did you have a comment?
I think it's reasonable, and as Corporation Counsel points out, most of our operators do a good job and make certain that they're selling legally. But it doesn't take more than just a small handful to create a problem for parts of our city. So I think this is reasonable. It's a first reading. And manager, are you the person, since the mayor is our liquor commissioner, do you oversee the enforcement of this according to the way this is written?
That's correct. If there's a hearing.
Now,
that
Mayor
would be-
Artis does not feel that you are usurping his role.
The tobacco enforcement has been the purview of the manager.
I'm
for
just
a long
curious, why would there be a difference of alcohol to tobacco? Simply an academic question. It just
The
seems
reason
odd.
is the mayor is the liquor commissioner, handles the liquor side of enforcement. Many of the other licenses and any issues like that we would be issuing through the city are handled through the
So
city.
you're the tobacco commissioner then?
Correct.
Thank you.
We had Councilmember Moore next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Corporation Counsel, you indicated that it does not appear that the majority of the tobacco retailers have issues with selling single cigarettes or selling to minors. What is how do we know that? Well, we know that we don't have citations, yes. But are we even looking for citations? So it goes back to, if you don't test, then you don't find any problem. So you're not saying that the problem doesn't exist. You're just saying that we have not noted any problems. And so I'm asking, how do we find out? Is there every 6 months we randomly go in and check people, or is this a situation where if a complaint comes in, how do we figure out that complaint was valid? How do we test the process to find out if this is existing? And I will say the reason I'm asking is because none of the ones on here are the two that I'm thinking of that are notorious for doing this daily. So how do we figure that out?
That's a very good question. For the citations that are issued here, those are actual citations that are issued. And in checking with the police department, those were either formal compliance checks, and often the police department receives various grant dollars to conduct both tobacco or liquor compliance checks on an annual basis. Those can be complaints that come in that are investigated. Those can be tickets that come up randomly, perhaps because the officers are there. Complaints are made. They're in the business for other reasons. But I can't give you a percentage of what businesses are actually done for compliance checks every year. I didn't bring that information with me. I can just tell you the citations that were issued.
So who does the compliance checks? Is it someone from the community development, economic development, the police department?
Police department.
Okay.
And they use individuals that would be, as far as for selling underage, they work with individuals that are under the age of what is now 21 in order to buy, to do a controlled buy of that product.
So that's for underage 21, but if you're 35 years old and you go in and you just want to buy one cigarette, then they're not running afoul of the under 21.
That would be for the code section that was listed for 18592, where we had the majority of citations. For 2016 to 2020, where we've only had 5 citations issued for selling single cigarettes, those obviously wouldn't be people that were under 21 or 18 at the time purchasing those. Those would have been controlled buys by, it could be a multitude of people that the department would use.
Let's come back. Would you mind indicating for 2019, well, for the situations where you talk about selling single cigarettes, when those violations took place? I'm curious to know if it was a long time ago, if it was recent, if we're doing something on a quarterly basis. Mr. Manager?
Maybe the police chief, who's in the other room and can't see you, could answer some of these questions about enforcement.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Manager. Thank you. So in regards to conducting periodic checks, we do basically 4 times a year we will conduct compliance checks on all of the businesses that sell tobacco. And one of the things that we've run into, because we get the complaints about businesses selling single cigarettes, but what we run into is when we send somebody in there that's not from the neighborhood, and it can be anywhere from a undercover officer to a another cooperating individual that we use. If the clerk does not know the person, they won't sell them the cigarettes. So that's one of the issues that we run into. But we do about 4 checks per year on every single business that has a tobacco license.
Thank you. That was the information I was looking for.
Thank you. I had Councilmember Ali next.
Thank you, Mayor. I was reviewing the areas that have been stricken from this reading and then the areas that have been added. And it's some of the areas that were added that I have questions about. One is related to, let's see, section 18-616. Well, that's posting. Let's see. Well, I guess it's still 616, unless it's 617. Maybe it's 617. There's no page numbers at the bottom, so I can't really direct you to a page number. But item B says the city manager shall have the following powers and duties with respect to cigarette licenses. And item 3 under that says that he would have the power to examine or cause to be examined the books and records of any such applicant or licensee, and to hear testimony and take evidence for use in the performance of the city manager's duties under this chapter. And then item 4 gets into compelling the attendance of a witness by subpoena and production for examination of any books, payrolls, records, correspondence, documents, papers, or other evidence by subpoena in any investigation or hearing before the city manager. So, I mean, are we becoming the IRS, or this sounds very invasive relative to compliance for tobacco license? So, can you clarify, please?
Councilwoman. This is actually very similar language to what we have currently for the mayor under the liquor provisions of the code. And it's also similar to other provisions that the city manager has in relation to other licenses. The massage establishment licenses, for example, have the ability for him to ask people questions under oath, and if records are not provided, for us to obtain a subpoena to obtain those from the circuit court.
So in what cases would you need to see the books? Because you heard that they were selling a single cigarette, and so you want to see all their books relative to payrolls and other correspondence documents. I mean, are you looking for other evidence to attempt to close the business or take away the license, or what's the purpose?
This is the general revocation, suspension, and fine section of the entire tobacco licensing code. So it could be something, it could be related to that we don't think that they are reporting something correctly to the city. It could be that we have a suspicion that they are selling underage, and maybe something about looking at the books, theoretically the amount they're purchasing versus the amount they're selling, and the taxes on selling a whole pack of cigarettes versus if we think that maybe they're selling one, maybe the tax doesn't add up, for example, on the amount they're buying versus the amount they're reporting as selling, and maybe that would help us determine if they're selling single cigarettes based on the tax stamps. So that could very well be an example of why we might ask to look at some of the books.
Okay, it seems very invasive, and I don't know how far you've taken this before relative to the tobacco license, but this is new language that you would be adding here. This was not here before, correct?
Those two provisions would be new language, correct?
I'm concerned about that language. It seems rather very invasive. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, Councilmember Jensen next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious. I think Councilman Grab sort of went in this direction, but why is there a reason, Corporation Council, we just decided to have the city manager be the person that conducts the hearings rather than a hearing officer? I'm wondering why we're going this route.
As you know, the state liquor code actually designates the mayor as the local liquor commissioner. So that's the very general explanation to why the mayor and the liquor commission hear any violations for that. If you look throughout the rest of the code, almost all of the other licenses have typically been heard by the city manager.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Mm-hmm. Do you anticipate this being very many hearings a year? It just seems like, I mean, I know the city manager already has a lot on his plate, so.
When we did the evaluation to determine the number of tickets that had been issued, to determine how many had been issued for selling single cigarettes and how many had been issued for selling perhaps to underage individuals, in the overwhelming majority of those cases, those fines were paid. They were $500. They were paid relatively quickly, and no hearings were requested in that matter, at least as far as we could see going back to 2016. So we weren't aware of any revocation or suspension hearings that were that had been asked for.
The city manager has been empowered with enforcing this statute since 1957. So that was when this code was originally established, when it was put in place. It's been the purview of the manager. I've been here almost 10 years and have not had one revocation hearing for a tobacco place. So this is just, the structure of this government is a council manager form of government, where the city manager is the chief executive that's responsible for carrying out the enforcement proceedings for many of these instances like we're talking about here. So that's one of the aspects that we have, is that you've vested that power. In many cases, it may not necessarily be the city manager himself. It could be a designee that is hearing those cases. In some instances, we do have an administrative hearing officer that will hear cases that are coming forward for specific statutes. So that's the structure that we've used and we've operated under here for almost 60 plus years.
That was my next question, is why aren't we just having a hearing officer or adding the language, the city manager or his or her designee, just to, I'm just wondering why we didn't include that language. Because I don't think, not that it's going to be a whole bunch of cases, but if since we do have a hearing officer that hears other things, I'm just thinking ahead, if you want to have that ability to do that, shouldn't it be in the ordinance?
We can certainly look at it, but again, I think the frequency of when we've actually moved to revocation has been very rare.
Okay, thank you.
We have Councilmember Kelly next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I really kind of agree, at least with the sentiment of Councilwoman Ali. It just seems like it's over the top, and again and again we hear that this really isn't a problem. We don't have hearings, we don't have this, we don't have that, but let's get a big new ordinance. I don't know why. It seems like much ado about nothing. And the powers, I'm not sure, I mean, I have this in front of me, but I can't quote it chapter and verse, but are the powers that the manager has under this revision greater than the powers that the manager had before.
They are, Councilman. And to your first point, we were asked to bring back revisions to the tobacco licensing code to specifically address the ability to provide for a plan of operation. If you're going to amend the code and require, perhaps in some instances, but not all, a plan of operation for tobacco retailers, we did need to include additional language that would allow the city manager to enforce those, because it would, as you said, be more intrusive than the licensing process had been in the past.
Yes, and I do recall that this was asked for. Yeah, I just think it's kind of over the top myself. I don't know that we need it. More regulation, and I know that our manager has plenty of time on his hands. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any further discussion on this item? If not, we'd entertain a motion to receive and file. Councilman Graham, seconded by Councilmember Moore. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
Motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 nay. Councilmember Kelly. Madam Clerk.
We're at regular business. 20-184 is a communication from the Mayor and Corporation Council with a request to approve the declaration of local state of emergency.
Okay. Is there a motion? Councilman Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question for our city manager. Do we have an ongoing tab? I mean, how much money we've been spending on the COVID-19? And how much money we're hoping we'll get back from either the state or the Fed?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman, for that question. We have been tracking our expenses. We've asked our employees to track and code any of their staff time that they've been using, as well as any expenses that we have been incurring. The plan, we're still waiting to hear from the state of Illinois on how they're going to provide communities with access to the coronavirus relief funds, which are to be used to reimburse us for our expenses. We've also been told by the state of Illinois that it's time that we start putting together the money that we want, or the expenses that we want to submit to FEMA. Now, the interesting thing about that is that FEMA says you need to exhaust all other sources of reimbursement before you come to ask for the public assistance money from FEMA. So we have one state agency that's responsible for getting out guidance on how to reimburse us at 100%, and another state agency that's telling us get the paperwork in so that we can get it out and pay you at 75%. Well, I know where I'd like to make sure that we get reimbursed at 100% for our costs. I don't have those total numbers with me this evening, but I'll get those for you, and we'll send that out tomorrow.
And are we at risk of losing some of this funding if we don't keep approving the mayor's keeping the rights?
I think that any of the expenses that are directly related to COVID-19 during this period of time, as long as we're under the state of emergency, ensures that we're going to be reimbursed. So I think that that's one of the important reasons why we continue to do that, and it runs in line and is consistent with what the governor has been doing with his state of emergency as well.
Motion to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilman Ruckriegel. Discussion, Councilwoman Moore. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion on the item? Seeing none, please cast your ballot. Oops. I haven't flipped the switch yet, so Councilman Montalongo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. City Manager, in the past, we did not file for a state of emergency or I should say local emergency when we had floods in the past, and you were able to take action and create because of the flood, we put up a wall sandbag, a lot of work that went into it. We spent probably, $750,000 to $1 million thereabouts in doing that, and we were able to recover those funds.
No. In most instances, when we've had flooding expenses, we have not been reimbursed because most of the time the flooding has not been as severe in Peoria as it has been in other parts of the state. That was in last year's flood, for example. The flooding that went through, we probably spent $200,000 on the flood wall that we put up. Unfortunately, the state did not designate Peoria County as eligible for reimbursement. Other counties throughout the state were, so we were not able to get that reimbursement. In some instances, and I'll have to go back and look to see when we actually did receive any public assistance funds based upon the level of the emergencies. I know that even in 2013, when we had our major expenses, I'll have to see if we got reimbursement, and we can get that answer for you.
Yeah, I recall having that conversation from you and discussing how that really upset our budget, and you were able to, I shouldn't say you were able to, that the city was able to get some funding back because of that, and that was our whole discussion about the downtown and when the floods happen, we're not prepared for it, and it's, I shouldn't say not prepared for it, it's not in our budget to put in $500,000 that it might happen every year, and I know that was part of our discussion in receiving funds back for that type of emergency, maybe not last year, but I know it was in some of the past years that we were able to receive some of that funding back. So I guess even for the state that we're in right now, this is declared by the governor, and I still think we would still be able to recoup our dollars, whether we pass this or not. I think our discussion started all with, you know, if there was a major emergency like an earthquake and the city council couldn't get back together here, and it gave the mayor and city manager the right to make some quick decisions on funding, and that's where everything had started from when this whole coronavirus started. So just want to kind of refresh some of the memories on how we got started with this here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
The motion passes with 10 ayes, 1 no. Councilmember Montalongo. Madam Clerk.
20-185 is a communication from the city manager and chief innovation officer with a request for the following. A is to approve and authorize the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Efficiency Network in the amount of $2,066,963 for a street light upgrade project of the city-owned street light system to reduce annual energy and maintenance costs related to the system. B is to approve and authorize the city manager to enter into a financing agreement with either INB&A or municipal leasing consultants in an amount not to exceed $2,067,000 with a rate not to exceed 4% and a term not to exceed 15 years. And C is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 2020 to 2021 biennial budget relating to the capital fund to recognize the cost to implement the street light upgrade project in the amount of $2,067,000 and the corresponding financing of the project. And we need 3 separate motions and votes, please.
Councilman Grab.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager, you or Chief Innovation Officer, this is going to be a huge plus in terms of the amount of human power involved in replacing burnout bulbs. As you know, there's barely a week or 2 that passes I'm not reporting bulbs out, and sometimes they're ours, but more often they're not ours, they're Ameren's. And sometimes it's very problematic when you have dark zones in our city for all kinds of reasons. This will be a real plus. One of the things that I'd like to hear is if we're sensitive to the fact that we can also maybe go overboard with lighting and disturb our flora, our fauna, be too invasive for the homes nearby. Did you choose a medium-grade bulb on this, Manager?
We did. Maybe if I could ask Director Corso to just quickly talk through kind of give you a quick overview of the project, and he can touch on that as well in terms of the lighting and the wattage.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Councilman, as you know, we began this as part of the discussions in the 2020-2021 budget to move forward with looking at how we could retrofit or upgrade the streetlights within the city to kind of save energy, save costs, and improve lighting quality. So that's something we've endeavored to do since late last year. Moving into this, it's a maybe not as large of a project as we had originally imagined could be possible. I think we were looking at additional savings if there was an ability to acquire some of Ameren's lights, but we were not able to go that direction. So what we are doing is looking at the city-owned lights that have not been recently upgraded, looking at upgrading those. We evaluated, the color temperature and the color rendering, which, allows you better visibility, for example, and we tried to more appropriately gauge the intensity of that light given where things are located. So we did kind of work through that. I think you've seen the highlights. I'm happy to kind of walk through some of the benefits of the project if you'd like me to highlight those again, but your question was more to the quality of light, and it is an upgrade. We are not necessarily going out and replacing posts and globes and things. This is upgrading the light source of the streetlights, the city-owned streetlights, to move to a more efficient and light quality with better visibility. Mic is not on.
A little bit different, isn't it?
I'm sorry, Councilman, I missed the beginning of that question. Would you mind repeating it? The mic was not turned on.
Yeah, so throughout the entire city of Peoria, the bulb will be standard as we make these replacements, and hopefully will last, 15 or 20 years, correct?
So the lights, the replacements of LEDs, we are looking at all of them being, that we replace being the same color temperature, so they'll match in color and kind of the color rendering, that visibility component. And most of these are anticipated to last, 20 years or so with the life. There's an hour rating on those.
Okay, now when the bulbs that aren't of this nature start to burn out, are we going to have a Dr. Seuss hodgepodge along a street?
So just to reiterate, all of the city-owned streetlights that have not been recently upgraded to LEDs, so all the high-pressure sodium and maybe other types of lights that are out there, will be retrofit as part of this project. So we should be consistent across all the city-owned lighting system, street lighting system.
And Councilman, the goal would be to keep to move towards a consistent lighting, so we don't have the hodgepodge look of
right now. Wood, just by way of example, I don't think I've seen anything quite like it anywhere else. There's a blue cast bulb for the Moss Avenue stretch. When those start to burn out, are we moving to this other bulb?
I know that our city engineer is here as well. Our traffic engineer is here as well, Nick Stouffer, and maybe Nick can answer to how we're going to handle those existing LED lights that are in place right now.
Thank you. Is that on? Thank you. Several of the lighting systems that we've recently done, like down in the warehouse district and the Moss area, they're already upgraded to the newer LEDs, so we weren't planning to replace them as part of the project.
Lights that we have downtown and on Main Street, what are they right now?
The ones on Main Street are high pressure sodium, so they'll be replaced as part of this project.
They're going to be extinct eventually, correct? And how's that going to be phased in? Are we going to just replace the existing yellow cast with the new bulb, and so we might have two of one color and one of another?
No, when we go through, it'll be phased completely. So we'll replace all the lights in each fixture as we go through the system.
And what's the difficulty we've been having with Ameren? I know that Chief Innovation Officer Corso alluded to that.
Thank you, Councilman. I think the thought entering into this initial conversation around a streetlight retrofit, we had looked at examples from other communities that had acquired utility-owned lights to bring all the system under kind of one control and update it consistently and look at opportunities to kind of leverage that savings to reinvest in the system. So we started with a larger conversation around what that would look like. And looked at what Ameren had on their website relative to municipal buyback programs. We did and worked through our consultant that we had brought on board to reach out to them and have a conversation. We were informed at that time that they were not interested in selling the utility-owned streetlights to the city, but did not give a reason as far as I know.
Thank you very much, Engineer Stouffer and Chief Innovation Officer Corso and Manager. Thank you.
I have Councilmember Moore next.
I've only got a couple questions. I visited with the city manager about some of this, and in looking at the communication, it brought up a couple questions to me. The first is the organization 10, the efficiency network. Where are they based?
10 is based out of Pittsburgh.
And were there no local companies or Illinois-based companies that could have done this type of work?
We actually worked through some initial groundwork that was done by the state of Illinois to find firms that would do streetlight retrofit projects, and we put an open RFP out for companies, and this was the group that was selected.
There were no companies that responded from Illinois, or there were no Illinois companies that could have done this work?
No, we actually, as part of the bidding process, did receive a bid from an Illinois company that we folded in with. We asked 10 to partner with them on the energy or the streetlight audit. It was a company called the Will Group, which is a firm based out of the western suburbs of Chicago. We asked them to come in and do the streetlight audit portion of that for us. So they became a sub as part of this contract. And that was part of the work that the council had previously approved when we presented that to you earlier.
Either 10 or the Will Group, minority company at all?
The Will Group is a minority-owned business, yes.
So they did the street audit in advance of this contract. Okay. So I see it down here at the very bottom of the first page, provide up to 100 replacement globes to address decorative luminaries. Is it my understanding that this contract, for all practical purposes, is just changing light bulbs?
That's correct. This will not be replacing poles or fixing any street lights that have gone into complete disrepair.
Other contracts somewhere else that's going to address that you just mentioned?
That would have to be a separate project that we would have to work on. I know you and I had discussed there are some parts of the south side that could use some attention in terms of lighting systems that are in a state of significant failure.
And in other words, they are encased in concrete, and the concrete's falling off. And it's bad, and it's been bad for a number of years. And the city manager and I had a conversation, and we are efforting to get that addressed.
Yes.
Thank you. So getting back to the replacement bulbs with the decorative lighting, so we're going to put these brand-new LED bulbs in, and some of these old globes will still be there, casting this orange hue somebody mentioned. So what's the point of that? The wonderful LED that is encased in an old globe that is so old that it has its own coloring to it, because the other ones, the other globes that, if you recall now, the other bulbs generated quite a bit of heat. And over a period of time, that heat distorts the look of the globe, so it is not as clear as you see now, but it's dusty and it doesn't cast the same type of light. And so we've got these wonderful LEDs and these globes that no longer are emanating the light that the wonderful LEDs are going to provide. What are we doing in that regard, Mr. Corso?
So, Councilwoman, there's an allowance. I can allow Assistant Director Stouffer to speak to this if he'd like after I finish. There's an allowance in the project. I know there are deficiencies out in the lighting system. We understand that. There's a small allowance within the budget. You alluded to the 100 globes. If there are badly deformed or discolored globes, those can be replaced as part of the project. But until we get out there and have started to retrofit those, we don't know exactly how many of those exist within the city-owned streetlight system.
Tell you, on the south side of Peoria, there's quite a few, and they're not the decorative luminaries as we listed here, so they probably won't be found on the south side. But I would like for you to investigate, because those globes need to be replaced as well, so that the amount of light that will be emanating from the LED is purposeful. And right now, I don't see that as being purposeful. Finally, it's my understanding that once this company replaces the bulb, if it still doesn't work, we have to have our own people go out there and figure out what's wrong with the unit. Is that correct, Mr. Corso?
Let me answer that, Councilwoman. This is Nick Stouffer. We will still have maintenance on these systems. There's still equipment that's going to go bad in addition to the bulbs. Occasionally the photocells or other equipment may go bad, so we're still going to have to maintain them, but the actual fixtures themselves will be longer lasting than what we have out there.
And so in the past, I'm sure you have, if we had asked about this in advance, you could tell us how much we have spent in servicing the unit versus replacing the bulb, but I didn't give that information to you in advance. Is that a small number? Is that a medium-sized number? Is that a number that is included in this $2 million, or is it already somewhere else in the budget?
Maintenance part of the street lighting, it is a significant portion of what our electricians do, but it's not included in this $2 million.
Okay, so, and if I understand it correctly, we saved a couple of jobs by going into this contract. Is that right, Mr. Manager?
That is correct. The intent behind this that would be, we had 2 electrician positions that were slated to be part of the position reductions, and by utilizing them as part of the labor force putting in and replacing the bulbs, we're going to be able to retain those positions for the next 2 years, the rest of this year and then into next.
Okay. I'd like to thank my colleague, Councilman Sear, for doing a lot of the heavy lifting in advance of my questioning, and I got involved after he did, so and a lot of this was already laid out, but I appreciate your work, Mr. Sear, and thank you to Public Works for your answers, and Chief Innovation Officer Corso. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Ali next.
That must have been a mistake.
Okay. Thank you. We have Councilmember Riggenbach next then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the efforts on this. And
Did he? You might have muted yourself, Councilman, or else you dropped again.
Not muted.
There we go. We got you there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry. About 6 months or so ago, I was getting a number of complaints about some of the new lighting going into East Bluff, and Director Powers and Engineer Stouffer worked with me and some of the neighborhood groups about the complaint that some of these lights were more like floodlights, or excuse me, like spotlights as opposed to floodlights, and that if you weren't directly under the light, the problem were actually worse than they were. And perhaps this was addressed in the 174-page report we got, and I missed it. But I was wondering if there was any consideration to those early concerns that we had gotten as to how we can address those going forward.
Thank you, Councilman Riggenbach. This is Nick Stouffer. We did work through that problem when Ameren replaced the 499 lights last year. You know, we worked through that problem, and actually this was a consideration when we went through our design about the lighting distribution. Ameren put in a lot of places a Type 2 distribution, which is more of a spotlight, and then we talked to them, and they ended up putting a Type 3, which is more of a floodlight in some of the areas. We've actually worked with Ameren consistently through this. So we have factored that into the design in our lighting. And in addition, Ameren is talking about putting another 100 lights in Peoria this year, and they've actually changed their design because of some of the discussions we had last year.
Beautiful. And 100 more lights in a city our size doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure it will go a long way in some of these dark spots throughout our neighborhood. So that's great to hear. I would also like to just follow up briefly on the coloration of the lights and the bulbs and whatnot. And you and I have spoken specifically about the color of the lightings along Wisconsin as opposed to on McClure, for instance, and the yellow hue. So is there any consideration of that in this project, or is that just a factor of the age and those needing attention in the next phase of whatever this project could look like?
Thank you. Like Director Corso said before, when we put these lights in, they're going to be a consistent hue throughout the city. I believe the ones in Wisconsin were a higher, brighter light, maybe 4,000 or 5,000. We're actually going to be near the 3,000 Kelvin in our project. The ones on McClure, those are mostly HSP, so they're going to be really, really yellow, and I think they have very, very opaque globes as well, so that will bank more yellow than what we're putting out.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? It was just a little staticky on this end.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said, so we're going to put a consistent hue, about 3,000 Kelvin through the city. The ones in
Right.
Yeah, and the ones in Wisconsin were brighter when we put them in, and they won't. The ones we're putting in won't be that bright, but they'll be brighter than the ones on McClure that you mentioned, which are the HSP, which are very yellow.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Euler next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe throughout different places in the city, there's obviously defective lights and things that need other types of maintenance. I assume those are in a queue somewhere. Will we be addressing all of these by area at one time, or will there be different efforts going on to address this project versus the defective lights that currently still exist?
So this project is not necessarily targeted towards the defective lighting, the ones that are obsolete or can't work. But we don't have a schedule of exactly where we're going to go, but there's going to be two efforts in Peoria, the ornamental lights and the tall masted overheads, so they will be working concurrently to get the project done in time.
So what is our plan then to address the defective lights such as in the warehouse district?
We are working with the manufacturer to try to get replacements for those, and we're also working on other solutions. But that's being done within our existing operating budget.
What kind of answer can I give to my constituents related to what they can expect in terms of getting those types of issues addressed as compared to other areas getting new ones?
We're consistently working on the ones in the warehouse district when we realized that there was a problem. The lights that were put in were defective, and the manufacturer has agreed to give us some over time, but we haven't replaced all of them. But there's a lot of lights there for our staff to correct, so it's going to take some time to fix.
And then when do you anticipate a plan that we can also communicate to constituents as you move through the city so they have some type of an idea of when you may be working in a certain area?
Once we get a schedule, we will put that out in news releases to try to give people an idea of what's going on. Obviously, it's going to be a multiple-month project, and once we find out what parts of the city we're starting in, we can start targeting that information.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Sear?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a financial question for our city manager. Refresh my memory, where's the $2 million going to come from to pay for this project?
The money is going to come from the energy savings from our current energy line items that we have, our electricity line items. We're anticipating that we should be saving $180,000 to $200,000 a year off of this lighting system. We're also going to get some rebates as we put in the energy efficient lighting. That's going to go to finance the project. We have two bids that were respondents that we've received financial proposals from, and we're trying to negotiate the best price with those right now. And so that's, I think, the second motion that you have here in front of you this evening.
None of this money comes from the CIP?
It's being set up in the CIP, but the cost will be transferred back in from the general fund from the energy savings.
That's why you call it revenue neutral.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Do we have any further discussion on this item? If not, we need separate motions for A, B, and C. Anyone want to? Councilman Gribb?
Manager, let me just ask one more question, then I'm going to move to approve. Is there a specific area in Peoria where the type of bulb that we're going to be using extensively in the city can be viewed by our constituents so we can say, there it is right there?
I'll turn that over to Director or to Engineer Stouffer to maybe to point to that.
This is Anthony Corso. We certainly have talked about it from the beginning of the project. We have the opportunity to showcase and demonstrate what those lights will look like, what the color temperature of the bulb will look like, for example, as part of the project. So we can certainly make sure to organize that and share that out.
Have any of these bulbs been used anywhere in the city of Peoria yet?
Hold on. There's a number of places that we've done similar bulbs, like with the Cobra heads that we put around MacArthur, the bridge, and in that area. But for the most part, we're going to do a lot of replacing throughout the city. There's almost 6,000 lights that we're going to replace during this project.
So, Nick, you trailed off a little bit there. You say there is a street we could drive down and see what they're going to look like?
As far as the high-masted ones, the ones on MacArthur at the bridge and south of the bridge are similar. But for the most part, majority of the city lights that we own, over 6,000 of them are being replaced as part of this project.
And that's why I'm asking this question, because we want to know what this city is going to look like. It's going to make a huge impact in the way we're lighting our city. And so we want to be sure we're not not a personal reference, but we're not buying a pig in a poke.
You can also look at the lighting level on the new stretch of Northmore, west of University.
And the other stretch should be on Northmore?
Northmore, west of University to Allen. Those are newer lights that will not be replaced.
Thank you. Mayor, I would move to approve A.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve A, seconded by Councilmember Ali. Any additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilman Riggenbach?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. On item B, Councilman Grab?
Move to approve.
Motion to approve item B, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. And on item C, Councilman Grab.
Point of order, this will require, I believe, 8 votes. Move to approve.
Motion to approve, seconded by Councilman Euler. Discussion on this item? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-186 is a request to approve a resolution endorsing the affirmation of shared principles between the Illinois NAACP State Conference and the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police.
Councilman Sear, motion to approve. Seconded by Councilmember Moore. Is there discussion on this item? I'm seeing none. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk.
20-187 is a communication from the city manager, director of community development, human resource director, and police chief with a request for the following. A is to approve the Community First pilot program, and B is to adopt an ordinance amending the City of Peoria 20-21 biennial budget relating to the transfer of program income generated by CDBG and BRP programs in the amount of $45,000 from the capital fund to the general fund to fund the Community First pilot program. And we need 2 separate votes, please.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you. This is a pilot project that between the discussions between the police department, the community development department, and our human resources department, we wanted to move forward with. We currently have 8 recruits that are scheduled to go to the academy in September. And in discussions with the community development department, who had a need for temporary code aids over the summer that we had actually identified as part of the budget of being an area that we were going to reduce, we began discussing the idea of maybe we could see if the recruits that would be starting in September would be willing to come on and work as temporary code aids over the summer, and so that we could start bringing them into the city, giving them an opportunity to see what it's like to work in our neighborhoods, to see the city from a different department's perspective, and to provide them a different type of experience in the neighborhoods than they might initially see as a police officer. And so we were able to find some dollars that were in capital funds that could be reprogrammed that will allow us to go forward with this. And I'm probably not doing, that's a very quick summary, the justice of the program, and maybe if Director Black or Chief Marion might want to add anything that they would have at this point in time.
Okay. Chief or Director Black?
Thank you, Mayor. Just really briefly, I think the city manager summarized it very well, actually. I think this is a good opportunity to bring some future police officers in to allow them an opportunity to meet neighborhood leaders, to learn about the city, and to really be out on the street with code enforcement inspectors dealing with the citizens of Peoria in both good and bad situations on a daily basis.
Did the police chief have any comment on this?
But just to echo what Director Black and the manager said, I do believe that this will be a strong program that will help to be recruits get used to the area and get used to the citizens, the community leaders. So I do think it is a good program.
Okay, thank you. I have Councilmember Moore first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Marion, in your experience having gone through training to become an officer and now to rise to the level that you are now, do you feel that this is exposure that will help the new recruits relate better to the community as people to be collaborative with versus those to be enforced upon?
I think it will give to-be officers well-rounded exposure to the community and how to work together. So yes, that is a good point.
And the reason I mention that is because I would imagine going into training, and I've never been a police officer and never gone through training, so correct me if I'm wrong, there is a level of structure and expectation that the training officers will be providing these individuals, young, fresh brains, not understanding necessarily that the community are the people who pay them and are deserving of respect. So is that another aspect that you think these recruits will get, understanding that, you know, they are here to, as the sign says, to protect and serve and be a part of the community, although early on they have to live in the city, but we won't go down that road.
Now, honestly, I wouldn't agree 100% with the way you explained it at the beginning, because one of the things that we really strive and teach on is community policing and treating people with respect. When recruits are first sworn in, that's one of the first talks that I have with them. So I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that it will be good for the officers.
Unfortunately, you're not the one that's training them when they go to the academy. But as we have seen in news reports, some of what is occurring out there has been attributed to the training they received at the academy. So I guess what I'm just suggesting is that this opportunity for them to become part of the community may blunt some of the not so nice things they learn from other people when they reach the academy. Thank you.
I have Councilmember Kelly next.
I would just like to say I don't know everything about this program, but it sounds like a very good and a very innovative idea as far as I am concerned. This kind of contact with the community can't help but just improve things rather generally. So I would move to approve this item. That would be A.
Okay, we have a motion to approve item A, seconded by Councilmember Moore. Further discussion, Councilman Grab.
Chief, one of the things I see in this is the opportunity for some of our young officers to get some idea what our residential Peoria police officers do, paying attention to quality of life issues. And in a way, it's kind of a mini tutorial as it relates to quality of life issues in the neighborhood, code enforcement, et cetera. So I think this is a great idea, and I think that some of us would like to see, of course, more residential officers, more officers in general, but this is a good first step, sensitizing our officers to some of the problems in the neighborhood. For years, we've read about the broken window theory, and this allows them to see some of the issues that our code enforcement department encounters every single day, and allows them to relate to the community as relates to that issue and other quality of life issues that our resident officers have to key in on every single day. Am I wrong on that or partially right?
No, sir, I believe spot on with that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay,
Thanks,
you.
Chief.
Councilman Riggenbach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Director Black, for doing a little bit of thinking outside the box here. I think this is a great pilot program, and definitely be interested in seeing what kind of results we have by September. And just again, thank you for thinking a little bit beyond the lines here. So I think this has got a lot of promise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more lights. We have a motion and a second on item A. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And on item B, just for clarification, the communication said the money was previously programmed from CDBG, so does that negate the need for a supermajority? This is just a clear...
This is a transfer of funds into the general fund, and we are increasing the spending authority, so it would need the supermajority vote.
Would need, okay. Councilman Kelly.
I move to approve, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Ruckriegel. Is there discussion on item B? Thank you. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
20-188 is a communication from the city manager and finance director with a request to approve a resolution adopting an early retirement incentive to eligible members of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. And I want to call your attention to a resolution that's in yellow on your desk. And there are two resolutions in your packet. This replaces the first one with the date of January the 1st, 2021, and the second one, I believe, is the August 1, 2020. So that's the difference.
Okay. Councilman Willer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've continued to labor over some tough choices in closing what still exists to be a significant operational budget deficit, we've got an item in front of us here that allows us to meet a couple of objectives. First of all, giving an incentive to tenured employees that are on that verge of making a retirement decision but not quite there yet, allows them to make the decision to do so that we can continue to grow and develop our newer, lower in years workforce and grow them in their careers here with the city of Peoria, which I think is a great opportunity to help both of those groups reach some objectives there, because as you all know with union contracts, if we have to go down the layoff route, we're going to eliminate those newer employees. And then as Councilwoman Ali presented to us a few weeks ago, a lot of our diversity efforts have happened in the last several years, and with having to take the layoff route, we eliminate a lot of those efforts, and giving incentives to retire some of our tenured employees will help us continue to work on reaching those diversity objectives, so I move to approve.
And that was that the August date? That was going to be the August
Correct,
date? Okay.
yes.
Motion, is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Jensen. Okay, discussion on this item. Councilmember Ali.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a number of questions for City Manager. First of all, police and fire are not eligible for an early retirement incentive.
That is correct. This is for only employees that are enrolled in the Illinois Municipal Retirement System. The police officers have a separate statutory pension system, and firefighters have a separate statutory pension system, so they would not be eligible.
So they're only eligible for the VSI, the voluntary separation incentive.
That is correct.
And with regard to diversity within our workforce, my understanding is our overall diversity is about 30% minority. But for police and fire, for police, I think it's 18%, and for fire, it's 15%. Those are the areas that we've struggled the most in terms of diversity, yet the ERI doesn't actually address that area in terms of allowing individuals to retire and replace them with a more diverse workforce. So the area that we struggle with the most, police and fire, is not included within the ERA. Can you tell me how long employees will have to take advantage of the ERI?
The window would be a 12-month window, so it would start August 1st, I think is the motion on the floor, of 2020, and run through July 31st of 2021.
So we wouldn't really realize our savings right away. We wouldn't realize our savings until a little bit later.
That is correct. There is up to 12 months that you would have that. When we last implemented an ERI, we had an initial reduction in force, then we opened up the window for the early retirement, and then had take a look at what that did, and then we had a second reduction in force at the end of that year period in order to try and manage that process, to see what we needed to do. Looking at trying to achieve the savings that we wanted to, that was the way that it was implemented in 2011 and 12.
Okay, and then with this resolution, this incentive would not start until January. They couldn't take advantage of it until January.
No, this would be, with the motion on the floor, it would be August 1.
August
So,
1, okay.
August 1.
All right. And then the VSI that public safety could be eligible for, how much time do they have to take advantage of that?
So the VSI being a different tool, is structured differently, and I think that it's the next agenda item that we have, but I think that we had proposed that any employee that had 20 years of service would be able to basically take that retirement and get $25,000 towards health insurance, and you had to let us know by, I think, August 14th was the date that we were setting that up, and then you had to retire on or before August 31st. Because we're structuring that program, we have the ability to set that up that way. I think there's a 45-day period at which an employee can say, I may have signed that paperwork to retire, but I want to take that back. I don't really want to retire. Because it's a voluntary program that we're offering for our employees. So it's a different type of incentive, right? It's an incentive that provides health insurance versus increasing your pension, where you have to pay, you have to contribute as an employee, your employee share for that. You have to buy those 5 years of service credit, and then the city is responsible for making up your liability that's out there. The employer's portion, we have to cover that as well. So that's the reason why it's a little more costly to do the ERI than the VSI, and it takes longer because IMRF wants employees to have a 12-month period of time to look at when they might want to retire, and also for the city as an employer to look at how they may want to stagger some of those, so where you don't have a situation where you lose 6 people in one division or one department that may leave at any given time.
So with the VSI, we would actually realize our cost savings within a 45-day window?
We would have certainty of it, but the likelihood, and this is one of the elements that we've seen just with past times that we've offered the voluntary separation initiative for non-public safety employees, is that the numbers are a lot smaller in terms of people that will take advantage of the VSI. And we already know that based upon the actions that the council's taken, that we're going to have to be looking at now 15 positions for elimination that actually have people that are working and employed, and they're not just vacant positions. So there's 15 layoffs that we're really trying to address. There's a bigger pool, I think, with the ERI of people that may opt to take that. We just have to work through it. It just takes longer with that.
And I understand that more non-sworn employees, non-public safety employees would most likely take advantage of an ERI versus a VSI. But public safety could, if we chose to provide a VSI for public safety, there could be savings there as well as the avoiding of layoffs.
That is the case. One of the things that we did with the next agenda item is that we restricted it to non-public safety employees, quite frankly, because council hasn't moved into the discussion about public safety employees yet. So that was the reason that it was structured the way that we rewrote it to just address. And we kind of looked at it, it was going to be a binary choice. One was either the council's going to do the ERI or council would do the VSI for non-public safety employees. And since we really haven't moved on to that discussion yet in the budget discussions about public safety employees, that we would address that maybe at a different date.
On the agenda last meeting was a VSI proposal.
For all employees.
For all employees, and it included public safety.
Correct.
Okay.
And we modified it based upon the discussion that we heard that night at the council meeting.
With regard to an ERI for IMRF positions, isn't there something about a higher back of a replacement of only 80%?
There is. I think that in order for, and this goes to the whole math that we need to follow with regards to the layoffs. We've identified 15 positions that we need to lay off to achieve the budgetary savings that we've been looking to work towards. So if we open up this ERI, we're going to need to not fill every one of those positions that comes back in with it. That's why in 2011 and 2012, we had some combination of layoffs with the early retirement incentive, because what we're trying to do is get to a dollar amount. And so you're trying to reduce the budget down. And as the analysis shows in the council communication, we need some amount of positions that we're not going to backfill. There may be a position that you absolutely need to fill, but then you need to look at how you're not going to backfill either an entry-level position in that department or some way of doing that to reduce the headcount of the city in order to achieve the savings that we're trying to achieve. Otherwise, if we filled every position and we put everyone back in that took it, it's going to cost us more money than it would be to actually provide it.
Definitely lose some savings, but I mean, there still would be some savings because you're replacing higher salary people with lower salary people in many cases.
In some cases, you might. There could be people that are at the top of their salary range, and you're bringing in an entry-level person in a department that may be making less. It may not be the case if you have a department head position and now you have to go out and recruit for that person. You may end up actually spending more in some instances than what the current salary might be. So it's going to depend on what the labor market looks like.
And Mr. Manager, is that 80%, is that an ordinance or is that a practice, or where does that 80% come from?
I think that really came from IMRF saying that in order for it to be effective, you really need to be looking at not filling 1 out of every 5 positions. The council communication, we talked about it, of saying that it may be higher than that. It may be 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of even every 2 positions we wouldn't want to fill. in order to generate more savings.
So that's more of a guideline?
Correct.
From IMRF, okay. I just want to make sure that we're not leaving people out in terms of public safety. A VSI was attractive to me because it included public safety, and in my opinion, it provided an opportunity to address diversity in an area where we have not been very successful in terms of police and fire positions. And also, the opportunity to avoid layoffs within that area. So I just want to make sure that we're not leaving out public safety with regard to, that we have an item under unfinished business for a VSI for non-sworn, and I know that that can be modified to include sworn. So I would encourage us, whether that's tonight or whether that's delayed to the next meeting, I would encourage us to not leave that important body out in terms of public safety for a voluntary incentive, a voluntary separation incentive. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councilmember Moore next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Manager, back when we had our strategic planning sessions, we have talked about, one of the topics that came up was the span of control and looking at the departments to determine if there were savings opportunities by looking at or expanding or contracting in some cases the span of control. When we talk about not then replacing 20% of those who may decide to separate, have we gone through and looked at that span of control and determined if there were savings in that area where the 20% are absorbed because we've realigned the span of control?
The difficulty is that what we're talking about here are positions that are on this list because the incumbent actually meets the age and years of service requirement. So it's not the same as if we were to really look at look exhaustively at the organization and say that we're going to really do that kind of span of control analysis to look at that across the board. Knowing that our departments are getting smaller just because of the fact that we have been reducing our headcount, we certainly can do that. I think that the idea of looking at how we might restructure the city as part of this this budgetary process and the crisis that fiscal crisis we're finding ourselves in makes a whole lot of sense right now as we look ahead to the next couple of years of delivering services in a constricted fiscal environment. It makes sense for us to look at all of that right now.
Well, I appreciate your response. I guess my point is if we had looked at it when we talked about it or looking at it now, perhaps there are people that fall within on this list that may have been in that number.
Perhaps. I mean, some of the recommendations that we're making to you about positions that we're proposing to eliminate by department, the department heads have been going through that, looking at it, saying, based upon our fiscal condition, here's where we would make reductions. And so they've started to tighten that up. That's not going to necessarily jive with what's on this list because these are people that just meet those age and service requirements. But we can marry the two together as we go forward from that, and that's something that we can certainly do.
Have an opportunity in looking at the list of people who meet the age and service requirement I see you have all of their names listed here, so we know who they are. Were you able to determine what percentage of those folks on this list are minority?
How many are minority, you said?
What percentage?
So the percentage has roughly been about 28%. There are two people on the list, if we're talking about the August list, that I know of, that one that's no longer with the city, who has moved on and taken another job, and another person who's retiring at the end of the week. So That number is, I think, at about 27% of the 52 city positions that are eligible.
And what is the city's position or policy in hiring? I know we are an affirmative action company. And with the police and fire agreement that you've entered into with the NAACP's assistance, there's a certain percentage that we'd like to bring in on police and fire. But when it comes to these individuals, the IMRF, are we similarly involved or encouraged to bring a certain percentage on board? As a city, would we like our number of minorities hired in the city to represent those that are in the general public?
Our standing goal is that we're trying to have a workforce that reflects our community.
Is there any legal concerns with trying to get to that?
I'll defer to our corporation counsel to talk about any legal concerns about that, but I don't think there's really any legal concerns. It is a goal. It's an aspirational goal that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Councilmember Jensen next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions here. I'm assuming because you used the 60% that you think might take the offer and gave us that cost, is that kind of your estimate or ballpark as to how many you think will take it?
The ballpark, just based upon past experience, that what we saw back in 2011 in terms of the number of people that took it. I don't think you'll see 100% of the 52 employees and then the 19 library employees take it. I don't think you'll see everyone do it. This is an inherently personal decision, just as if we were to offer the VSI. It's going to be really up to that individual to decide whether or not they want to take advantage of this. Is it their time in their professional career that they want to leave this organization? So it's an educated guess.
Okay. Is there a reason why you didn't do surveying before, since we've been talking about it for a couple of months?
No, just simply because I think we've had some indication of where people were, just based upon prior estimates. We knew that if we offered the VSI for non-public safety, the number's probably going to be in the 10 to 12 to maybe 15 range, and that the ERI would be a little bit more attractive for some people to take advantage of. So.
Okay. Let me make sure if I had anything else. I think that's it. All right. Thank you.
Councilman Graham.
Mr. Manager, last time we met, the council approved some non-public safety cuts. Did anyone ask you what service delivery implications those cuts would have?
I don't recall if that was a specific question that was asked that evening. If it was just that we were moving down the path of what were some of those. We did have in the slide deck some points about where we felt that we were going to see some of the impact of doing this. Knowing that on the non-public safety side, that we're going to have fewer employees here in City Hall to support all of the other line departments. That when it comes to community development, that we would have less resources to be out in the neighborhoods and out in the street. That Public Works would see significant reductions in terms of our ability to respond to infrastructure needs, as well as respond to snow events, just because we'd have a smaller workforce. So,
apparently was not curious, because they didn't ask such questions as, is it going to be 4 inches of snow before we start plowing in our neighborhoods, 5 inches, impact on public safety, community development, code enforcement, how we're going to be doing that. The council was very uncurious. And tonight, I would ask that the council ask for more information, because you didn't last time, and you're going to learn a lesson, hard lesson. when you start getting complaints from your constituents on what you approved last time, you better know, because I'm not going to support any of these things, VIS tonight or ERI, until I know more about the service delivery implications for my constituents. And it's not here. And the devil is always in the details. It's just not here. I think it's totally irresponsible for the policymaking body to sign off on any of this, not knowing what this is going to mean. There are inherently personal decisions that the people in my district make every day. Do we feel comfortable living in the city of Peoria, number one? Number two, what's the quality of life going to be like in my neighborhood going forward with these cuts? And what options do our policymakers have to go one way versus the other? Or do they even have the curiosity to find out what the implications are for any of this? Some of us were wondering what kind of power we should give the city manager. What kind of power we should give to any of us. Ultimately, what happens here is going to be a decision made by the council. Patrick Urick is not going to be facing the voters anytime soon. You are. And you're going to have to do some explaining when you sign off on something that you don't even know what the hell it means. And I'm serious. Maybe that's one of the perils of being around here for a while. I've yet to see our city management take a position that, look, I don't feel comfortable with these cuts because of public safety reasons, quality of life reasons, safety of the people in the neighborhood reasons, or real estate value reasons. So therefore, council, I can't recommend this. But if you don't want to do this, you got to be willing to do revenue A, revenue B, revenue C. And then, guess what? If we have difficulty making the decision, we need to consult with our constituents. They need to know precisely what we're signing off on. So tonight I'm going to be no on all of it because I don't know service delivery impact. I had an idea what it was going to mean last time, but nobody seemed interested. The snow starts to fly, and they're calling you. Remember what you did 2 weeks ago. And the manager is going to say, well, you approved this on such and such a date. So if the ambulances can't get into Wardcliff, they can't get into Moss Bradley, you can't get people plowed out for a couple, 3, 4 days, you have half the number of snow routes. Well, heck, that's what you signed off on. You sat there quietly, silently, not doing your due diligence. After we get full information, maybe it'd be a smart thing to go ahead with ERI or VSI, non-sworn and or sworn. But until such time as we get this fleshed out a little bit further, I am urging you not to support any of these things tonight. Thank you, Mayor, for indulging me again.
Thank you.
You know, I am a broken record, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Ali.
Thank you, Mayor Artis. I tend to agree with my colleague, Councilman Greb, in terms of lacking information. about service delivery impact. We're lacking information even about what kind of savings we might get out of ERI and when. I mean, it's certainly a delayed response because we're giving 12 months. I guess by regulation, we have to allow 12 months for people to respond. But I think that we're doing this in a piecemeal way in terms of separating the VSI from the ERI, and we'll decide on one tonight and another night, and we're not looking at things comprehensively. I don't like that approach. I think it's very piecemeal. And I want to ask the city manager, 2 weeks ago, this council voted 6-5 to lay off 18 individuals. And I think somebody left voluntarily or resigned, so we were down to 17. And of that 17, what percent were minority?
I believe of that 17%, it's about 30% are minority.
Okay, I thought we discussed 40.
Let me get the number for you.
Okay, that's the
Even if
number
we
that
said
I
it's 40.
remember. Yeah, the number that I recall was 40%. So some of the same people talking about diversity tonight, how this is, we want to diversify our workforce, are some of the same people who voted to cut 18 jobs, of which 40% were minorities. So I asked, how really serious are we about diversity? And the area that we are hurting the most in diversity is police and fire. 15%, 18%. We're not making any ground in this area, yet that's the area that we want to exclude from the incentive. We have an opportunity to make some change in the area that we're hurting the most. We have on the table a proposal to exclude that very body. So I asked, how serious are we about diversity, diversifying our workforce? How serious are we about avoiding layoffs through attrition or some type of incentive program? I wonder about service delivery when it comes to not replacing 20% of the IMRF positions. We don't know the impact. And because of those reasons, I join Councilman Greb in not able to support these. I would hope that we can defer both ERI and VSI until a time that we can look at both of these in a more comprehensive way. That we bring them together, we vote together, we don't do it in a piecemeal way, but we look at everything. We also look at impact. Thanks, Mayor.
Councilmember Euler, did you have your light?
I just want to comment on the fact that, we've sat here week after week again, and now we're back down this road of we want a whole comprehensive plan or we're not going to make any decisions. Well, we went down that road for months and didn't make any decisions that way either. So I'd like to see some of the proposals put out on the floor that some of those that don't want to support anything would like to put in front of us to make some decisions. If you want to do the tax increases, put them on the floor and let's talk about them. If you want an entire comprehensive plan, put that on the floor and let's talk about it. But we have to actually do something. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager, I have a question regarding the timing of departures if we were to offer the ERI, the timing of the departure. You said something earlier about even though there's a short window for them to let us know they want to leave, can we pace the timing so that we could
If a department or if there's an operational need for us to stagger the retirements, we can do so under the early retirement window. Under the VSI, it's a very shorter window. Just we've prescribed it that way. I guess if council wants to extend that window out, you could. But the intent with the ERI, if this is successful tonight and goes forward, we would have to look at probably a first round of workforce reductions, look at how much the implication is or what the impact is of the ERI, and then follow that back up with maybe a second round later in 2021 as we look at that. We may need to, but we're gonna have to look at that and see what the operational intent would be. I would probably hold off on making any workforce reductions until then. We circle back with those employees that would be eligible for the ERI to really then allow them to talk to IMRF and see if there's any interest. Some may go right away. Some may go within 2 months. We'll have a better understanding of that if this passes, and we can go forward from there.
So if this passes, a person doesn't necessarily say, okay, January 1, I'm done. December 31st, I'm done. They can't make that unilateral decision. It has to be an agreement.
There has to be an agreement. But we can't, one caveat is if someone wants to retire before July 1 of next year, because IMRF has, when you retire, you have the ability to get what they call a 13th check if you retire before July 1. It's just an extra check in a 12-month calendar year that you have to let them go at that point in time. They have to be able to leave. That's really the only caveat to that entire discussion.
Okay, so that helps a little bit in that when we talk about service delivery, which, in my opinion, we need to hire more people because the service delivery could be better, especially in my district. But getting back to this, it would allow you the opportunity to bring folks in and train them before other folks left. Maybe not one for one, so you couldn't bring in somebody.
No, I would advise against the overlap of hiring somebody while somebody else was here in most cases, just simply because you're not garnering any savings by somebody at that point in time leaving. So
no, my example was you have 3 people in a department that want to depart, and one leaves, and you replace that one,
right,
and that person's being trained, and maybe a second one leaves, and you replace that second one, and that person's being trained. So by the time all 3 of them leaves, at least by the time the third one leaves,
yes,
you have some backfill.
We would,
well.
yeah. I would
Okay.
agree.
Because I've talked to a number of people who have asked me to approve the ERI. And these were employees, of course, IMRF employees, who just happen to be African American. And so they're sitting listening right now saying, yeah, Denise, vote for this, I'm out. Because they, frankly, they've got the time in, they've got the age, and they want to go. Now, and it's voluntary, right? So you're not insisting that anybody leaves.
That's correct.
So there is some level of understanding that if we lose a certain percentage of women, they voluntarily decided to do that. And so, thank you.
Okay. Councilman Sear?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment. I don't think anybody gets a worse return on their investment than the people of the 5th District when it comes to services. Mr. City Manager, VSI, what does it stand for?
Voluntary Separation
And
Initiative.
IRE, what's it stand for?
Early Retirement Incentive.
Okay. So we're not pushing anybody out the door, basically. It's all voluntary.
Correct.
So to my colleague, Mr. Graham and Mrs. Moore, how would we know the level of services would be depleted if we don't know how many people would take the package if we offer a package? I mean, is there a way of knowing that? And can we max out on the number of people that we would let them take the early retirement package?
So we know what we've proposed as far as workforce reductions and the impact that that's going to have on service delivery. And we don't know how many people are going to take any voluntary initiative we have. This just provides an alternative for us to then use someone voluntarily leaving to be able to restructure the organization, to redeliver services, and hopefully reduce the number of layoffs that we have, where we're telling somebody you no longer have a job. And I think that in doing that, there's some uncertainty with it, that we're going to have to work our way through this, just as we see when people opt to leave, whether it's with the VSI or the ERI. But the intent would be that we try and remember, we're here saying that we're trying to reduce the workforce. Everything we had, we've said we're cutting 95 positions out of this organization because we have no resources to be able to pay for it. So we don't have the revenue coming in. That's the reason why we need to reduce 95 positions citywide, why we recommended 3 engine companies, we recommended 28 positions in police, and we recommended the other 45 positions that we're talking about in the rest of the city organization. That's the reason why we're here, is that we have this pandemic that is cutting our revenues off. We didn't want to do this. I don't want to lay anybody off. That's not what we signed up for this year when you guys adopted a budget. What we wanted was to deliver a plan that said that this is the direction that we needed to go. But that world has changed. And so now we're at a position where what we're trying to do is live with the resources we have. That's it.
You're saying this report's an impossible report for you to give us back. Is that correct?
I don't know how I could. I mean, other than to say this is an undeniable truth. Our service levels for a city, when we're cutting positions, are going to suffer. They're going to go down. We are not going to be delivering services at the same level and the same capacity that we have because we just don't have the resources. And it's the facts. The revenues aren't coming in the way that we anticipated that they are. And so in order for us to live within our means, we have to reduce our budget. Or we have to raise revenues, as Councilman Graves said.
So last question, 6 months from now, we get some good news and we're getting out this COVID-19. Can we, you talk about restructuring our workforce. I mean, we could be able to add, if revenues start coming in, we'll be able to re-add some services and do a better job for our constituent, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Graham.
Manager Urick, you're not politically naive, nor are any of the people around this horseshoe. First Tuesday in November, we're going to be electing a third of the Senate, all of the House, 435 seats, and we're voting on the President of the United States. You all have a letter in front of you. You can read it. I don't need to read it to you. From AFSCME, Council 31, referencing HEROES Act that is being negotiated now. Mention of SMART funding, etc. You are all not naive. You have to know, and the manager knows, that there is one hell of a huge amount of push coming from municipalities all across the United States to not have these big holes punched in its public safety delivery systems with everything happening today. Mayor after mayor, council after council, all over this country will be shedding, and you know this, manager, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs. Now, you all can't be so politically naive as to believe that the senators in some of the states, it could go either way, and the president, they don't want to see a huge spike in unemployment, which undoubtedly will occur if we all have to lay off all these public safety professionals. Common sense should tell you that we may have to, we probably will have to make some difficult decisions. But we know something is coming. And all I'm asking you to do tonight is to find out what the service delivery implications will be. And I think it's premature to say we're going to need another revenue source, although it's probably true if we have a line of credit. We have to pay back whatever we draw on a line of credit. But then you all can't be politically naive, because you have to be listening to the same news outlets I'm listening to about the projections that are being made by Larry Kudlow, the Council of Economic Advisors, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Mr. Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. You have to know that there is great consternation about this economy falling into a huge depression, that we can't have all these municipalities not getting help with everything going on. Not just Peoria, it's all across the country. So there's a time to get more information. I would hope we would use the next 2 weeks to get the service delivery impact information, see how things are going in Washington, and see how it progresses. But I guarantee you, no politician running for office this November wants to see the unemployment rate go from 13 to 15 to 18%. And to see our cities going without the requisite amount of public safety and services needed to preserve real estate values and keep people safe. Say, no, you may need to make the decision right now. Right now, or you put out a tax right now. That's nonsense. We're more intellectual and cerebral than that, I hope. I hope we're capable of realizing there's a lot of moving parts right now. And as I said last time, and I'll say it again, when it is time for us to act, I would hope we would have 11-0 on this. Because if we move too quickly, and we slash the city to the bones unnecessarily and do a lot of pain to the people in our districts, all of our districts, 5th District 2, 4th, 3, 2, 1. I'm advocating for all the districts, as the at-larges do, and the mayor. We will be very sorry. The next 2 weeks, we need to get service delivery implications for all of these, and hopefully by then our elected leaders will be moving. Because November, the first Tuesday in November, that's one thing I know for sure. I know it's coming. And I know there's a lot of political careers that are going to hang in the balance if we have all these municipalities being body slammed. Think about it. Thank you.
Any final discussion on this item? Councilman Ruckriegel.
Thank you, Mayor. This is probably one of my harder decisions this past couple of weeks, really taking a look at this. City Manager, before COVID happened, were we on extremely solid footing?
We were as good as we have been in a long period of time.
Weren't where other cities are, which had reserves, which could help soften a little bit of this here and buy some time.
Our reserves are not where they need to be.
Okay. And we're looking at other governmental entities, even within our region here, who, even after having to make hard decisions, are meeting their reserve requirements so that they can, because we don't know where this ends. I want to believe that this is going to be a V-shaped recovery and recover quicker than what some of the analysis says, and I know that there's some competing analysis on there. But I agree with Councilman Euler. At a certain point, we've got to start moving in a direction to make some decisions here. I get asked by a lot of constituents, what did you actually accomplish in the past city council meeting? And those are constituents from all over the city because they're trying to figure out with us where we're going with this. Because they're wondering what's going to be happening with their city, and they don't want to see their services cut, but they also can't afford more in taxes. And it's not because of the city's fault. It's a combination of all of those taxes. But let's not forget that we've passed quite a few fees recently. We can call them fees, but they are hitting the pocketbooks of our people. And so they're wondering what we're going to be doing. Nobody likes to make these hard decisions. And I'm not thinking it's any easier making these decisions in Springfield or Washington, because if it would be, those decisions would be made and we'd have some answers. But the problem is, they aren't elected to make our decisions. We are. We are elected to be able to make the decisions for the city at this point, given the information, given the status we have. And at a certain point in time, I think we've got to make those actions move in a direction. So I was not in favor of passing this tonight. And having re-looked at this and knowing that we have to make some decisions, and we need to offer, because this also allows some of our younger people to avoid layoffs that we have within some of our departments, and we do need that. I will be reluctantly voting for this, but we're going to have to hold accountable the plan you have here, because we're not just trying to one in, one out on this plan. You're not putting this plan in because we want just different faces. You're doing this plan because we are in a financial situation, which we've been aware of for years, and we now have to be able to make some of those decisions. We didn't know it was going to be this bad. Nobody ever wanted this, but we can look forward to being able to make some decisions that help move us into a category where we're on stronger footing. You didn't bring this to us because it's pleasant. You didn't bring it to us because it's what we want to do. But at a certain point in time, we've got to start putting some stuff on the table and make some actions. So reluctantly, I will be voting yes for this, because I think that we need to give our citizens a direction in which we're going to start making the choices necessary for this city to survive this COVID situation. Granted, we hope some money is going to be coming around, but we haven't seen that come by yet. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Last call. We have a motion and a second. Just for disclosure, the Corporation Counsel just sent me a message that said that I can't vote on this because I'm eligible, which has not been part of the discussion, but I've held back any discussion or saying anything since she sent me that, so my vote will be an abstention. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach.
Aye.
The motion passes with 8 ayes, 2 noes, Councilmembers Ali and Grab, and an abstention by Mayor Artis. Madam Clerk.
Unfinished business 20-141 is a request to approve a voluntary separation incentive for non-sworn full-time employees.
Councilman Euler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we defer to the next meeting so that we can evaluate and potentially including sworn officers, staff. Thank you.
Seconded, Councilman Ruckriegel. Discussion on the deferral? Seeing none, please cast your ballots. Member Regenbach.
Aye.
That motion passes with 10 ayes, no nays, Councilmember Moore absent. Madam Clerk.
20-095 is a request to approve and authorize the execution of a contract with Resource Management Associates in the amount of $38,850 to administer the fire captain promotional exam.
Councilmember Grab, motion to approve. Thank you. Second, Councilman Kelly. Discussion on this item? Councilman Kelly.
Just a question, Your Honor. Your Honor. Mr. Chairman or Mr. Mayor. I suppose it is good practice to have these administrations done by outside agencies, outside companies. Is that these are not handled internally, I guess, for good reason, or?
The process was established by the bargaining agreement, and we utilize an outside testing source to provide that service to us. So it's mutually agreed upon by both parties.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on this item? We have a motion and a second. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
The motion passes with 10 ayes, no noes, Councilmember Moore absent. Madam Clerk.
20-125 is a request to approve the recommended 20 to 21 budget restructuring as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there is a handout on white paper on your desk.
Maybe, Mr. Manager, before I hand it over to you, just an observation with the moves that have been made tonight. We're going to see some change in our workforce. We don't know exactly what that number is going to be. It may be additional, depending on the discussion in 2 weeks on VSI. We're going to see probably some of your department directors may take the early retirement. Actually, many may take the early retirement. But I go back to the strategic planning discussion that we had, seems like a long time ago, but early in the year. And one of the things that the council talked about was strategically talking about the organization as a whole and how it might look, depending on. We certainly didn't think we were going to have to do it this year. We've already talked about, but the time has come sooner. Being as Councilmember Gribb mentioned in the previous item, that we haven't identified a way to pay for the working capital, and there's still some moving parts on the public safety piece of this. I don't really know how much else is on the table right now for us to consider. So what I would just offer for consideration at this point is to ask you to ask the council's support, to ask the manager to come back to us. It's probably a little bit, quite a bit to ask for in 2 weeks, but perhaps come back in a month with what that, and we're probably going to have an idea on what some of these numbers are going to look like by then, but how you can look at basically your cabinet and how you think we might be able to structure this to be as efficient as we can. And I'm just saying that if the council has anything else that they want to do on the budget, this is the time to do it, but we don't have anything else on our table right now. So it would probably be helpful to hear a little bit of feedback or any other additional information that the council would like to ask the manager to work on in the meantime. Councilman Gribb.
Clearly, we're not going to approve it, so what would you want? A deferral, something of that sort?
No, it's not a deferral, because this part of this last item on the agenda was basically just to continue the restructuring discussion. So it's probably just to give the city managers the direction that the majority of us would like to see that.
I would do that then.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Manager, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that as we were kind of wrapping up the strategic planning discussion, we talked about conceptually what does the organization need to look like in going forward? Are there ways that we should be restructuring? Do all of the services fit within the kind of the department structure the way that we've had it laid out? And this would provide an opportunity for us to take a look at that. I have a staff meeting in the morning. We'll be happy to have that conversation with the department heads and begin that process to provide some feedback to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else, council? If not, I guess would just be a receive and file. Motion to receive and file, Councilman Seer, seconded Councilman Ruckriegel. If there's no further discussion, please cast your ballots. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Aye.
The motion passes with 10 ayes, no noes, and Councilmember Moore is absent. Madam Clerk.
If there's no further unfinished business,
Do we have any unfinished business tonight? Unfinished? Okay, I'm seeing none.
we would be at new business.
New business to come before the council. New business. Councilman Seer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this is old business or new business, but I just got another question for our city manager. As we go through this very painful meetings, I still have not heard any idea about if we get 97 to 100 people retiring from all our different departments, we're still looking at a $20 million bond. Is that correct?
Yes.
And anybody talking about how we're going to, which revenue or how we're going to attach a revenue to this $20 million bond? I mean, is there any discussion going on in any of the departments, any new ideas, or how are we going to accomplish that?
No.
So we're still looking at, even with all the hard discussions we're having right now, we would have to raise property taxes the way it is right now to cover that $20 million, correct?
Absent another revenue source that comes in higher than we anticipated, the answer to that would be yes.
Okay. Councilman Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to know if we have any rules that apply to receiving important information at our desks on council nights, whether or not there are policies or whatever. I certainly glanced at these. I couldn't tell you precisely what the difference was with what I had come prepared to discuss. And this is all important. I understand that, but do we have any rules about such things?
I don't. I would say, and I'd defer to the clerk, but typically when we get information on the night of a council meeting, specifically if it's on yellow, it's a change to some information that we already had. Many times it's a word or a date, but we don't have. It's really an attempt to get us the most current information we have. Sometimes it wasn't there when the council packet came out, and so rather than not give it to us at all, we get it later. That would be my answer. Madam Clerk, do you have do you know of a rule that I don't know about?
There's really no hard and fast rule, but what I know the department heads try to do, that if there's a change that happens like over the weekend or something to the council packet after it's been published to you, they try to go ahead and send it to you as quickly as possible, even if it's on the weekend or Monday. But some of these do happen last minute, and I think it's just changes that happen without notice.
I think it might be helpful if we're not going to have a deadline, and I can understand not having a deadline, if at the front end of any of these things that we get, if it could say, here's the change. It's line 19, item B, whatever. Here's the change. It did this. We changed it to that. Here's the reason. And then have the document, something like that. This is, I'm sorry, I didn't read it all before the meeting, and I'd appreciate just that much, respect for us. We're all trying to do our job, and sometimes get a little blindsided by some of these things. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other new business tonight? New business. Madam Clerk.
Well, we would be at citizens' opportunity to address the city council, and we gave public notice that anyone who wanted to make a comment could email me by noon today, and I have received no comments.
So before we go for a motion to adjourn, I think there's probably, if there's any of our loyal listeners still listening, one of the questions probably is going to be, especially since we're going to be going into Phase 4 on Friday, Mr. Manager, our intention for the next meeting in terms of what we anticipate being able to accommodate here in City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what we will see is that under the Phase 4 guidelines, that we will be able to open the meeting up, but restrict the capacity of the room to 50 people or less. So we will be working to try and come out with some guidance on how that will look, and we'll send that out so the public is aware of what we'll be looking at.
Thank you. And I didn't know if we had specifics, but I was pretty sure that that was what it was going to be close to. And for our listening audience, so this is our second meeting back in council chambers as a whole. Staff has been in another room talking to us from remotely, but we're just as anxious for the meetings to get back open as the public is. And so the reason I bring this up tonight is so they can be looking for information here in the next couple weeks that will identify how we will be working that, keeping in mind that according to the new regulations, we can't have more than 50 people in this room, and that includes council and staff. Thank you very much. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn by Councilman Sear and seconded by Councilman Kelly. Please cast your ballots. Councilmember Regenbach.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned.